Was 22, Jake and I were always looking for a new trail to try out. We didn't have a lot of money, but hiking was free, and it made sense to just drive out and disappear into the woods for a few days at a time. Jake liked planning out routes. He'd spend the whole week on trail maps, making lists, measuring distances, and picking where we'd camp. Most of the time, I just let him figure it out, since I was happy to just get away. That September, we had a 3-day weekend, so Jake suggested Bear Lake. It wasn't too far, 3 hours by car, and then a pretty long hike, but nothing he thought we couldn't handle. We left early on Friday, with Jake carrying the bulk of our gear. I had a small pack, mostly snacks and a change of clothes, and he took the tent, food, and sleeping bags. The weather was mild, a little cloudy, but nothing threatening. The forest was green and thick, and I remember feeling like we were alone in the world after the first mile. The first day was just walking, not much to look at except trees and the occasional view when the forest thinned out. The trail was muddy in places, but Jake set a steady pace. By late afternoon, my shoulders ached. We only stopped to drink water or eat a granola bar, then kept moving. There was no cell service out there, and I stopped thinking about home or anything else pretty quickly. We found a small clearing and Jake pointed out some rocks for a fire. He set up the tent while I got a little fire going. Dinner was basic, ramen and beef jerky. Jake talked a bit about work, and I just listened, tired but comfortable in the quiet. When it got dark, he banked the fire and we crawled into our sleeping bags. The forest felt huge and close, but not in a scary way, just different from what I was used to. I fell asleep fast. The next morning, the sun came through the trees and woke us up early. Jake was in a good mood, joking about coffee and pancakes, even though we had instant oatmeal and powdered milk. The trail to Bear Lake wasn't marked well, and at one point we almost missed a turn, but Jake caught it before we got too far off. The forest got denser the closer we got to the lake, with roots and rocks making the hike slow. Around noon, we could hear water, and by 2 in the afternoon, we made it to the shoreline. The lake was bigger than I expected, the water dark and still with trees growing right up to the edge. Jake was tired, sweaty, and a bit cranky from the extra weight, but once we set up the tent near the water, he relaxed. I washed up in the lake, cold but refreshing, and sat by the fire while Jake cooked another dinner of rice and beans. The sun went down behind the hills, and the air got chilly. Jake sat with me for a while, poking the fire, but by 9, he said he was beat and wanted to sleep. He crawled into the tent and was out in minutes. I wasn't tired, not after all the coffee I'd had earlier, so I grabbed my book and read by the fire, listening to the wind in the trees and the sounds of water lapping against the shore. It was quiet, but not dead silent. I could hear something moving in the bushes every so often, small animals or birds. I kept reading, turning the pages slowly, letting the fire burn down a bit. I wasn't scared, just alert, the way you get in the woods when it's dark and there's nobody else around. Sometimes I thought I heard a branch snap a little ways off, but every time I looked, there was nothing there. The moon came out, making the lake shimmer. I put my book down and just watched the water for a while, thinking how different it felt out here, how every sound was clearer. By 11, I started to get a strange feeling that I wasn't alone anymore. It was just a sense at first. The woods behind me seemed darker, heavier. Then I heard footsteps, not close, but definite. Slow, careful, moving through the undergrowth behind the tent. I tried to tell myself it was a deer or maybe a raccoon, but it didn't sound like an animal. The steps were even, deliberate, stopping and starting, not just crashing around like wildlife usually does. I listened for a long time, hardly breathing, hoping it would just move on. After a minute or so, I called out, "Hello? Is someone there?" My voice sounded too loud. There was no answer, just the wind, and then silence. I stood up, walked a few steps toward the trees, and called again. Nothing. The footsteps stopped, and for a moment, I wondered if I imagined them. I went back to the fire and sat down, waiting. A few minutes later, I heard them again, but from the other side of the clearing now, like whoever or whatever it was had circled around us. The steps were slow and careful, almost like they didn't want to be noticed. I felt the hair on my arms stand up. I put out the fire fast, not wanting to be seen, and walked quietly to the tent. I unzipped it and whispered to Jake, "Wake up. There's something out there." He grumbled and turned over, but I shook his shoulder and told him again. He sat up, rubbing his eyes. "What?" "It's probably just deer," he said, but I could tell he wasn't fully awake. I sat and listened while he stayed quiet for a bit, eyes half closed. The footsteps had stopped again, and the woods went back to being silent. Jake shook his head, pulled the sleeping bag back over himself, and mumbled, "It's just animals. Go to sleep." I sat in the dark, waiting, listening for any sound. But Jake was already breathing slow and steady again, out cold while I stared at the tent wall, ears straining for the footsteps to start up again. I didn't sleep after that, just listened to every sound outside the tent and tried not to breathe too loud. Jake fell asleep again, but I kept looking at the fabric wall, trying to see if a shadow would move on the other side. I must have sat like that for hours, shifting from side to side and feeling the ground getting colder under me. It felt like the night was never going to end. At some point I heard branches breaking not far off, but nothing came close. My mind started playing tricks on me, turning every crack and creak into footsteps. Sometimes I thought I saw a shape moving outside, but I couldn't be sure. Around 3 in the morning, I saw a sudden burst of white light cut through the dark. It was so bright I thought it was a car at first, but we were too far from the road. The beam swung across our tent, lighting up everything inside. Jake woke up fast and sat up. I barely had time to whisper before he reached for the zipper. He opened the tent just enough to peek out. The light moved back and forth, then landed right on our tent again. Jake shouted, "Hey, what do you want?" His voice was sharp, echoing over the water. The light clicked off instantly. We heard fast, heavy steps in the brush, someone running away through the trees. Jake pulled his own flashlight out and aimed it where the guy had been standing, but there was nothing but trees and empty space. The undergrowth was too thick to see much. Jake scanned the whole clearing, but we didn't see anyone, just shadows and branches. He zipped the tent back up and told me to keep quiet. We stayed awake, trading the flashlight back and forth, both of us looking out the tent flap every few minutes. The woods were dead silent except for our breathing and the soft slap of water on the shore. Every now and then, I thought I could hear something moving out there, but it might have been an animal or just my nerves. We sat with our backs to each other, facing out, listening hard, waiting for another flashlight or for someone to walk up. The night dragged on, and every sound made us both jump. We didn't say much, just watched and waited for the sky to get lighter. The first weak light of morning finally crept into the clearing, pale and cold. Jake was the first to unzip the tent and step out. The ground around us looked normal at first, just damp dirt and fallen leaves. But then I saw the prints. They were everywhere. Deep boot marks circled our whole tent, some right up against the fabric where someone had walked close enough to touch. Jake pointed out where the dirt was scuffed up, showing where someone had stood and shifted their weight. He walked around the tent, counting, then shook his head. "There's at least 15, he said, and I saw the worry on his face, jaw tight. Near a tree at the edge of the clearing, I saw something else. 3 cigarette butts, crushed out in a little pile. The dirt there was pressed down, almost like a seat, and there was a mark where someone had leaned their heel in and twisted it back and forth. Jake crouched down, picked one up, and swore quietly. It was still warm. He touched the others. Same thing. Whoever was out there had been sitting there watching us, smoking and waiting, for who knows how long. The prince went from the seat to the tent and back again, in circles, like the person couldn't decide what to do. We didn't bother with breakfast or coffee. Jake just said, "Pack up. Now." My hands shook as I rolled up my sleeping bag and shoved everything into my backpack. Jake didn't talk, just moved fast, glancing into the woods every few seconds. We tore down the tent, stuffed it into its bag without folding it, and kicked dirt over what was left of the fire. My heart was pounding. It felt like the woods were closing in on us, every branch and shadow hiding something. I kept looking behind us, sure we'd see the man with the flashlight standing there, just watching. We left the clearing by 7, and the trail back to the car felt 3 times as long. We walked fast, not stopping for water or breaks, not even to rest. Every now and then, Jake would look back or shine his flashlight into the brush, but we never saw anyone following us. The sun was up, but the woods still felt heavy and silent. We barely talked, just moved as fast as we could, feet slipping on roots and rocks. At one point, Jake stopped and listened, holding up his hand, but there was nothing. Just a bird calling in the distance and our own breathing. By late morning, we made it back to the parking lot, sweaty and tired. Our car was just where we left it. Jake locked the doors as soon as we got inside. We drove straight to the ranger station, and Jake reported everything. The footprints, the flashlight, the man in camouflage, the cigarette butts. The ranger listened, not surprised, and said, "We've had a few calls like this. Same kind of thing. Someone's been stalking campers, mostly couples." He told us they hadn't caught anyone yet. Sometimes the person just watched. Sometimes they tried to scare people, but so far, no one had been hurt. He said, "You did the right thing by leaving right away. Don't ever try to confront someone like that." We drove home in silence. I kept thinking about the man sitting in the dark, watching us for hours while we slept. Maybe waiting for us to come out. Maybe waiting for us to fall deeper asleep. Jake tried to talk about it, saying maybe it was just a sick prank, but I couldn't stop picturing the flashlight and the prints right up against the tent. I still go hiking sometimes, but I don't camp overnight anymore. Not out in the open, not anywhere you can't lock a door. I still think about that night, about the man standing just a few feet away, waiting for something. Sometimes I wonder what he would have done if we hadn't woken up. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't heard those footsteps at all. I've been teaching high school history for 12 years now at Lincoln High. Most days things are predictable. I keep my classroom pretty tidy. Books lined up, a couple faded posters about the Civil War, the old clock on the wall that's always a little bit slow. The days have a rhythm to them. You get used to hearing the hallway doors bang after the final bell and the voices fading out as students rush to get home or to practice. That's why what happened last October still sits in my head, replaying again and again. It was a Tuesday, just after 3:30 p.m. The main rush had cleared out, and the halls were mostly empty except for some kids in after-school clubs. I was on my way to the parking lot, walking the long corridor that cuts through the west wing. There's a spot where you pass the literature classroom. Old room, creaky door, the kind that barely shuts right. As I was passing, I glanced through the skinny window in the door. Inside were 2 senior girls, Emma and Lydia. I recognized them right away. Both were good students, active in honors classes, never in any kind of trouble. That made it strange to see them sitting so close together, hunched over a desk, talking in low voices. What got me wasn't just that they were still there that late. It was their posture. Shoulders drawn in, eyes flicking around like they were waiting for someone to show up. Their backpacks were at their feet, and Lydia had her phone on the desk, but she wasn't touching it. Instead, she was focused on a spiral notebook, pen poised, writing in quick, tight lines. I slowed down, trying not to make any noise in the hall. The sound of their voices filtered through the glass, too muffled to catch full sentences, just the edge of their words. Then, as I stepped closer, I caught a break in the noise. Lydia's voice, sharper than usual, said, "It's got to look like an accident. Not drowning. There's always evidence. And falls can go wrong." Emma replied, "Yeah, but poison. Someone could trace it. There's always some test for that. It's too risky." Lydia shook her head and scribbled something down. The way they spoke, it wasn't like kids gossiping. It was slow, steady, like they were working through a math problem. I couldn't move. I just stood there, listening, breath shallow. The girls kept checking the door, so I made sure to stay out of their sight. I heard Emma say, "We need something clean, no DNA, nothing left behind." She sounded determined, not scared. Lydia nodded and wrote more in the notebook, flipping the page back to check a list she'd made. They started talking about timing. Emma said, "It can't be during the day, too many people. It needs to be late." Lydia replied, "We'll need alibis, something solid, and phones off. Leave them at home." The details came out, one by one. It was all methodical. Emma pulled out a folded sheet of paper from her bag, and they compared notes, matching up their stories. I felt my stomach turn. The language was too precise. Lydia muttered, "We can't just hope they'll believe us. We have to make it airtight." Emma wrote something else, then paused to look over her shoulder, eyes darting straight past the door. For a second I thought she'd seen me, but she turned back to her friend, lowering her voice again. There was no mention of names, no joking, not even a hint that this was some story or assignment. I thought maybe this was about a movie or TV show. High school kids talk about dark stuff sometimes, and I've overheard plenty of strange conversations over the years. But the way these girls were working, taking turns, listing out steps, double-checking each other's notes, none of it felt like a game. Their faces were too tense. At one point, Emma whispered, "What if they check the cameras? We have to know where they all are. Maybe walk around before, figure out blind spots." Lydia agreed, writing down times and places. Then she looked up and said, "Don't forget about the cleanup. Anything we touch, we wipe down." Emma was nodding, looking more serious than I'd ever seen her in class. They moved on to talking about what to do after. "We have to act normal. Don't say anything. Don't text." Lydia was insistent, repeating it as she wrote it out, underlining words. Emma glanced at her phone, then pushed it away again. I was gripping the door frame so tightly my hands started to ache. I tried to remember everything, every word, in case I needed to write it down later. Emma finally said, "We'll practice it. If we do it right, there's no way for anyone to prove it." Lydia replied, "Just remember, no DNA, no hair, nothing." The way she said it, I knew this wasn't some creative writing exercise. The more I watched, the more I noticed how calm they seemed. There was no laughter, no nervousness. It was like they were making plans for a school project. But the details kept coming. About gloves, about where to be and when, about what to do if something went wrong. I found myself backing away from the door, pulse racing, every step feeling heavier than the last. These weren't kids I'd ever suspect of anything violent. They were honor students, the kind that teachers trust, the kind that show up on time and help at assemblies. Still, everything I'd heard pointed to something real. They were too organized. The talk of evidence, of DNA, of alibis, of checking cameras, left no doubt in my mind. I waited, half hoping they'd laugh or say something that would break the tension, but nothing changed. Lydia looked over her shoulder one more time, made a note, and then closed the notebook. Emma zipped her bag and stood up. They left the room together, quiet, heads down, not saying another word. I stayed hidden until their footsteps faded, and only then did I move, my mind racing with everything I'd overheard. I decided I had to intervene before they did something terrible. I walked straight into the literature classroom, the old wooden door creaking behind me. Both girls, Ashley Thompson and Madison Clark from the senior parallel class, looked up at me at once, startled and clearly not pleased to see a teacher standing there after hours. For a second, nobody said anything. They exchanged a quick look, and I saw the annoyance in Ashley's face, the way she frowned and crossed her arms. Madison sat up straighter and locked her tablet. I tried to keep my voice calm. "Can I ask what you two are working on?" I said, trying to sound casual, but I could hear my own voice come out tight. "I heard part of your conversation and just wanted to make sure you're not planning anything dangerous." Ashley looked straight at me, unimpressed, and rolled her eyes like she was used to adults overreacting. "It's just a school project, Mr. Daly," she said, not even bothering to hide her irritation. Madison didn't say anything at first, just turned her tablet back around so I could see the screen. There was a web page open about famous unsolved murder cases, pictures of old crime scenes, news clippings, diagrams about evidence. Ashley spoke up again. "It's for forensic science," she said, letting her arms drop. "We have to do a presentation next week about why some murders don't get solved. We were talking about evidence and how people avoid getting caught." Madison finally spoke, quieter. "Our teacher gave us this topic. She wants us to figure out why detectives miss things and how evidence can get left behind." I felt a wave of embarrassment wash over me, but I tried not to show it. I asked them to show me more. Madison slid her tablet across the desk so I could see what they were working on. Open tabs about criminal investigation, case studies, crime scene analysis, and even a digital assignment sheet. Ashley picked up a sheet of paper and handed it to me. It was a printout from their teacher, clearly outlining the project. "Research a cold case. Explain how the crime could have been solved. Consider evidence, alibis, motive. Prepare a 10-minute class presentation using slides or posters." Ashley sighed, looking frustrated. "We're not planning anything. We just have to think like the criminals to see what they did wrong. That's literally the assignment." Madison nodded, finally making eye contact. "We're just comparing how different types of evidence get missed, like DNA, fingerprints, even security cameras." We were arguing about which method is hardest to solve. There was a tired edge in her voice, like she was used to being misunderstood. I apologized for interrupting, my words feeling clumsy and out of place. Both girls seemed eager to get back to work, and I realized how badly I had misjudged the situation. I handed Madison her tablet back and thanked them for showing me the project. Ashley muttered something about not being able to get any work done without people thinking the worst, and Madison just started typing on her tablet again. They were already turning back to their work as I left the room, feeling self-conscious. As the door closed behind me, I walked down the hall with my heart still thudding in my chest. I made my way to the staff lounge, found the science teacher still grading papers, and asked her if she'd assigned a forensic science project to her seniors. She nodded without looking up. "Yes. We started last week. They're supposed to research old unsolved crimes and analyze the investigation process. Sometimes they get a little too into it. She laughed. Last year I had a group bring fake evidence bags to their presentation. She glanced up at me, seeing my expression, and added, "Trust me, they're just following the rubric." Relief hit me, mixed with something heavier. I realized how easy it was to take things out of context and create panic from a normal conversation, especially when you only catch half the details. The girls weren't dangerous. They were just two students getting absorbed in an assignment, doing exactly what was asked of them. Still, the whole experience stayed with me. I thought about how many times teachers miss things, and how sometimes we see threats in harmless places because we're always thinking about what could go wrong. That evening, I sat at my desk going over my own lesson plans and made a note to be more aware of what other classes were working on. I told myself it was better to be cautious than to miss a real warning sign, but I also knew I had to check my assumptions. There's a fine line between keeping students safe and letting your imagination run wild. The hallways were empty by then. The only sound was the janitor's cart squeaking over the old tiles. I thought back to the two girls, just teenagers trying to finish their homework, and felt a strange mixture of relief and regret. I knew I would remember this the next time something seemed out of place. How easy it is to get things wrong, and how important it is to look for answers before jumping to conclusions. When my dad died, I was 34. He'd kept this big coin collection, locked away in a black safe tucked under an old workbench in the garage. The safe was heavy and wide, about 3 feet across, and had these ugly scuffs all over the front from being moved so many times over the years. I never really understood why he collected coins. It was just one of those things that was Dad's business, not mine. But after he was gone, I was left staring at it every day, and I knew I wasn't going to keep it. I didn't even know what most of the coins were, just that there were a lot of them, and some had these little certificates in plastic sleeves that looked official. I put up an ad to sell it online, hoping to get someone honest and just move on. Within a day or two, I got 5 responses. Most were the usual lowballers. A couple sounded like they were just curious. The one that caught my eye was from a guy named Steve Harris. He messaged me and said he ran an antique shop down in downtown Portland and had been dealing in coins for over 20 years. He offered a fair price, not the highest, but solid, and he seemed straightforward about the process. Steve said it was better to do the deal at my place, since the coins were in a big, heavy safe, and moving them would be a pain. That sounded fine to me. We picked a Wednesday evening for the meeting, after I was done with work. The day came and I cleaned up the garage a little, pushed some old garden tools off to the side, and rolled the safe out so we'd have light from the single bulb hanging overhead. Steve showed up right at 7 on the dot, driving a white Ford pickup. He parked on the street, got out, and gave a little wave. He was average height, maybe early 40s, dressed in a blue jacket and khakis. Nothing fancy, just practical. He carried a small case and a folder under his arm. He introduced himself right away, showed me his business card, and then his credentials, a dealer license and a laminated ID for his shop. I looked them over and everything seemed legit. He made some small talk about the weather in the neighborhood, glanced around the garage, but wasn't nosy about anything. Just straight to business. I felt a little awkward, to be honest. I hadn't really had anyone over since my dad died, and now a stranger was about to go through something that had just been sitting untouched for years. We got to work. Steve set his case on the bench, opened it up, and took out a jeweler's loupe, a pen, and a notebook. He asked if I minded if he started pulling coins out, and I said to go ahead. He worked methodically, laying each coin on an old dish towel, holding them up to the light one by one. The safe was packed. Rolls of old silver dollars, little velvet boxes, cardboard coin holders with yellowed tape. Steve flipped through them, sometimes humming quietly. I watched as he held a few pieces closer to the bulb, checking the edges, squinting at the dates. After a while, he started asking questions. Where did my dad get these? Had he collected since he was young? Did I know if he had bought them locally or online? I told him what little I knew. Some were from estate sales, some from a coin show out in Hillsborough, a few gifts from other family members. Steve seemed to know exactly what he was looking for. Every now and then he'd pause, check his phone, or write something in his notebook. He never seemed impatient or rushed. The way he handled the coins, I could tell he'd done this 1,000 times. The hour stretched on. He didn't make any weird comments or try to talk me down. He just kept working. Once in a while, he'd set a coin aside and scribble something, then return it to its box. The whole time, the garage stayed quiet except for the hum of the fridge on the other side of the wall. The light over us made everything look pale and a little grimy. I noticed Steve's hands never shook. He was careful, but quick, like he wanted to get through the work, but not rush it. It was strange, standing there, watching a stranger handle these old bits of metal that I'd never really looked at closely myself. After maybe an hour, he finished. He looked up and said he'd seen some good pieces, a couple rarer dates, and overall the collection was solid. He offered the same price he'd mentioned in his emails. I could tell he wasn't trying to take advantage. It sounded fair, and honestly, I was relieved it was over. He pulled out the paperwork from his folder, a simple bill of sale, all neat and typed up. He filled in the numbers and had me read through it while he started packing the coins back into the safe. The mood was routine, almost boring, and I started to relax, thinking about what I'd do with the money. We were just about done, both of us signing the papers, when we heard a sharp car door slam outside in the driveway. The sound echoed through the garage, made both of us pause. Steve immediately straightened up and glanced toward the window, a small rectangle above the workbench. He didn't look scared, but his jaw tightened a bit. "Someone's at my truck," he said, voice flat, but there was a little edge to it. He stepped over and peeked out, his hand still holding the pen. He turned back to me, eyes a bit more focused. "Somebody's messing with my truck," he said, and it wasn't a question. There was something different in his face now, alert. He looked back at the window again, then put the pen down. "Do you mind if we check?" He didn't wait for me to answer. He headed straight for the door, stepping around the boxes by the entrance. I followed him, grabbing my phone off the bench and shoving it into my pocket as we went outside to see what was happening. The passenger door on Steve's pickup was hanging wide open when we got outside. The little light above the seat was on, shining over the empty space where his briefcase had been. Steve walked fast across the gravel, not saying anything until he got to the truck and stared inside. "It's gone," he said. His voice was tight. "My briefcase. I left it right here." I looked around the driveway, not seeing anyone. There weren't any other cars, just mine at the curb and Steve's truck. The street was quiet, only a couple of porch lights on down the block. Steve turned on me, pointing a finger. "You set me up," he said. "You knew someone would be out here. That briefcase had cash for you, man. You let someone take it." I started to say no. I didn't know anything about this, but he was worked up. His face was getting red, eyes darting back and forth. "Don't act like you're clueless," he said. "You tell your buddy to rob me? Is that why you wouldn't meet at my shop?" I stepped back and shook my head, trying to get a word in, but he kept going. "It's a scam, right? I should have known." He kicked the tire and looked ready to lose it. Then, out of nowhere, someone came walking up the driveway. A young guy, maybe early 20s, skinny, wearing a gray hooded sweatshirt pulled up over his hair. He looked unsteady, like he was half drifting instead of walking straight. His eyes were bloodshot and wet, and he kept blinking like the light hurt. In his right hand, he held something low at his side. I saw the metal and knew it was a gun, small but real. He stopped a few yards away and stared at us. Nobody said anything at first. The kid's mouth opened a little. He looked at me, then at Steve, then back. "Give me the keys," he said, voice flat. He held up the gun. "And your money. Both of you." He pointed the pistol at Steve, then at me, then back at Steve. "Don't mess around. Do it." Steve froze for a second, then pulled his keys from his jacket pocket and held them up. I felt my heart thumping and raised my hands, palms open. "Look, take what you want," Steve said, holding the keys out. The guy jerked his chin at Steve. "Get in the truck," he said. "Front seat, now. I'm not playing." Steve tried to argue, but the guy stepped forward and waved the gun at his face. Steve climbed into the driver's seat, moving slow, never taking his eyes off the gun. The kid walked around, climbed into the bed of the truck, and banged his fist on the cab. "Drive," he said. "Don't try anything or I'll shoot." He pointed the gun through the back window. I stood there with my hands still in the air as the truck started up. Steve's face was pale, mouth tight. He pulled out of the driveway, moving slow at first, then speeding up as he reached the street. The truck's taillights disappeared around the corner. The house was dead quiet again, just the sound of the motor fading. I dropped my hands and fumbled for my phone, calling 911 with shaking fingers. I tried to explain everything fast, about the robbery, the gun, the kidnapping. The dispatcher kept asking for details. I gave them Steve's name, his license plate, what happened. They said to stay on the line, but I hung up and ran to my car. I started it up and took off down the street, thinking maybe I could catch up. I drove too fast, looking for any sign of the white pickup, but it was already gone. I circled the blocks near my house, checked the main roads, even stopped at a few lights looking down side streets, but there was nothing. The truck was just gone. I ended up pulling into a gas station and calling the police again. An officer met me at my house a half hour later. I sat in the kitchen and told them everything again. They wrote it all down, asked me about Steve, about the ad, if I'd had any arguments with him before, if anyone else knew about the sale. I told them no, just the people who replied to my ad, and Steve was the only one who seemed real. The next day, they called me back and said Steve Harris checked out. He was a real dealer, licensed, with a downtown shop and no criminal record. They showed me a photo of him from his driver's license, and it was the same man who came to my house. Later, the detective called and said they'd found Steve's briefcase dumped in an alley about 2 miles away. The cash was gone, but the business papers were still inside, scattered all over the pavement. No sign of Steve or his truck. The police got security footage from the alley, but all it showed was a guy in a hood dropping the briefcase and jogging away. There was a short segment about the case on the local news that week. The reporter said police believed Steve might have been kidnapped in a robbery gone wrong. The detective said the suspect looked strung out, maybe desperate for drug money, maybe just looking for an easy score. I gave them everything I had, but nothing new ever turned up. Weeks went by, then months. No sign of Steve, his truck, or the guy with the gun. The shop downtown stayed closed. His family put up flyers, and the police kept the case open, but nothing changed. The coins sat in my garage, right where they'd always been, in the safe under the workbench. I'd stand there sometimes, thinking how fast things could turn, how a simple deal could end with someone vanishing. Steve was just trying to buy some coins, and now he was gone. Sometimes random violence just finds you, and there's nothing you can do to stop it. Last summer, I booked a 2-day stay at an agritourism farm in Vermont to get away from Boston city life. The Miller family had been running the place for generations and offered simple accommodations with home-cooked meals. It was a white farmhouse with a sagging porch and a red barn nearby. My room was on the second floor, with old windows that looked out over endless green fields. I arrived late afternoon, just as the sun was dropping behind the hills. Mrs. Miller gave me a tour of the main house, the creaky stairs, and the small guest parlor where they served dinner. The kitchen smelled like bread and wood smoke. They had a few other guests, mostly older couples, and I ate my first meal at a big wooden table with everyone. That night, I walked out to the gravel drive and just listened to the crickets, feeling glad to be away from traffic and sirens. On my second morning, I woke up early, sunlight coming through thin curtains. The house was quiet except for someone moving around in the kitchen downstairs. I had pancakes and black coffee in the kitchen while Mr. Miller talked about the weather. Their farm was big, fields, cows, some woods out back. They had a map by the door with a few walking trails marked in different colors. After breakfast, I put on running shoes and grabbed my phone. I figured I'd go for a run to see more of the property, since I'd spent most of the first day just reading and relaxing. It was humid, and the air smelled like wet grass. I started out behind the barn, following a packed dirt trail that cut through tall grass. At first, there were open fields, broken by lines of wild flowers and low stone walls. I passed an old tractor half covered by a blue tarp, a few black and white cows standing in a distant pasture. The trail was marked with faded orange paint on the trees. There was nobody around, just birds and the soft sound of wind in the grass. I kept jogging, checking the map on my phone once, but it was straightforward. The farmhouse disappeared behind a small hill, and I went farther than I'd planned, enjoying the quiet. Every so often I heard a car on the road, far away, but mostly it was just my footsteps and the buzzing of insects. After about a mile, the trail curved toward a line of trees. At the edge of the woods, I saw a wooden sign nailed to a post. It was hand-painted, the words a little crooked, but clear. Old Mill, 0.5 miles. The arrow pointed down a narrow side path I hadn't noticed on the map. The path itself looked less used. Grass growing up in the middle, broken sticks, a couple of empty beer cans on the side. I stopped for a second, catching my breath and looking back. I didn't see anyone. I figured the old mill might be interesting, maybe worth a photo. So I turned down the side path. The trail to the mill was uneven and overgrown, roots crossing underfoot, thorny vines catching at my ankles. It felt more closed in than the main trail. The trees grew denser, shutting out some of the sun. The only sounds were birds overhead and the distant drone of a plane. I passed a pile of old boards, maybe part of a broken fence, and saw a rusted metal bucket half buried in mud. I kept going, slowing to a walk, because the ground was slippery in places. The farther I went, the less like a tourist trail it felt. There was a weird sense of quiet, like the woods were holding their breath. After a few minutes, I started to see flashes of water through the trees on my right. A small green pond, covered with algae and reeds. Finally, the path opened up, and I came out at the edge of a clearing. There, just where the woods met the pond, stood the old mill. It was bigger than I expected, maybe 2 stories at one point, but the roof had mostly caved in on one side. The wooden walls were gray with age, half covered in thick moss, and the windows were gone or boarded up. An old mill wheel, huge and round, leaned against the far wall, tangled in dead vines and ferns. The air smelled damp and earthy, a little like rot, but not in a gross way, just old. I took out my phone and started snapping pictures, moving slowly around the edge of the clearing to get better angles. There were empty beer bottles tossed in the weeds, some cracked boards underfoot. The pond beside the mill was still and green, broken by lily pads, a couple of frogs jumping off a log when I got too close. The whole place felt stuck in time. I wondered if anybody ever came out here, or if I was the first in years. It was peaceful in a way, but the longer I stayed, the more aware I became of how far I was from the farmhouse and anyone else. I walked along the side of the building, stepping carefully over a fallen beam. The wall was slick and cool to the touch. I took a few close-ups of the wheel, noticing how the wood had swollen and split from years of rain. I kept my headphones in my pocket, listening to the creaks and groans the old place made every time a breeze passed through. I took a shot looking back through what used to be a door, just a black hole now, with tangled roots sticking up from the dirt inside. I circled around the back, taking more photos, planning to put together a little Instagram post later. There was graffiti sprayed on one side, names and dates, a faded heart. I found a narrow spot where the foundation was exposed and snapped a shot of old iron bolts sticking out, rusted and half buried in the earth. For a moment, I just stood there, looking out at the pond, the reflection of the broken roof warped by ripples. I checked my phone, saw I'd been there about 10 minutes. I took a last picture of the mill wheel, overgrown with vines and rust, then turned around, thinking I should probably head back. When I got back to the farmhouse, I changed out of my sweaty clothes and went downstairs, feeling hungry again, even though it was just past 10. The dining room was quiet, with a couple reading the paper and Mrs. Miller wiping down the tables. I sat at the end, flipping through the photos I'd just taken, picking out the best ones to show her. When she noticed, I held out my phone and scrolled through the shots of the old mill, the pond, the wheel tangled with vines. She squinted at the screen, leaning closer. I asked her about the place, trying to sound casual. How long has that old mill been there? Do other guests ever go out to see it? Mrs. Miller's face tightened. She shook her head, saying she didn't recommend people go down there, especially alone. The boards could collapse, she told me, her voice serious. There are snakes in that pond, and sometimes kids sneak out there to drink. It isn't safe. She glanced at my photos again, and then away. There was a fire in 1987, she added. Roof burned. After that, it was just left to rot. We tell guests to stick to the main trails, just to be safe. Her concern felt real, not just the way some places overdo it for liability. She asked me, please, not to go back down there again, and I promised I wouldn't. That evening after dinner, I went back to my room and sat on the edge of the bed, scrolling through the photos on my phone. The pictures all looked pretty much like I remembered. Mossy wood, rusty wheel, tangled vines. I stopped on one where I'd tried to get the whole building framed by trees. At first, I thought my phone had glitched because there was a faint shape in the doorway that looked like a dark shadow. I zoomed in, holding the screen up to the lamp. In the middle of the open doorway stood a silhouette, just a little darker than the shadows around it. The shape was definitely human. Broad shoulders, a cap or hat, bulky work clothes. I hadn't noticed anyone while I was there, and for a few seconds I just stared, wondering if maybe it was a trick of the light, or if someone had actually been standing there the whole time, watching me from inside the mill. I flipped through the rest of my pictures, looking for any other sign of movement, but in all the other shots, the doorway was empty. The more I looked at the photo, the more uneasy I felt. The figure seemed to be standing very still, half hidden in the dark. I tried to remember if I'd heard anything odd, but all I recalled was the quiet and the sound of frogs in the pond. I turned the phone off and sat for a long time, listening to the old farmhouse creak and shift as it cooled for the night. The next morning at breakfast, I waited until Mrs. Miller came around to refill my coffee. I showed her the photo and explained what I'd noticed. The figure in the doorway, the way it looked like someone had been there while I was at the mill. She leaned over to study the screen, then smiled and shook her head. "That's probably just Tom," she said, like it was obvious. "He works the far fields, checks on the fences. Sometimes he cuts through by the mill to save time." She tapped the phone gently. "He wouldn't want to interrupt you if you were taking pictures. He's shy with guests sometimes." A minute later, Tom himself came in, smelling like grass and diesel. He was tall, with a cap pulled down low and muddy boots. I asked him if he'd been out by the old mill yesterday morning. He looked a little embarrassed, glancing at his mother before nodding. "I saw you there," he said quietly. "Didn't want to bother you. Just walked around the pond and headed back to the tractor." He apologized for not saying hello and explained that some guests like to take photos without anyone getting in the way. He smiled, a little awkward, and that was it. The conversation moved on to weather and crops. I felt a bit foolish for how much I'd worried. The rest of my stay went by quietly, walking the main trails, reading on the porch, watching cows graze in the afternoon light. When I left the farm, I looked at the photos one last time on my phone. The old mill was still there, falling apart by the pond, and the shadow in the doorway was just a man on his way to work. The whole thing stuck with me for a while. How quick we are to imagine danger when we're alone in a strange place. But sometimes, the answer is as simple as someone taking a shortcut home, and nothing more. So when I was managing this busy cafe in the mall, I usually stayed late to clean up after particularly crazy days. That Thursday was one of those days, packed until closing time with college students cramming for finals. We stayed open until 9, but people kept coming in right up until then, dragging out goodbyes or grabbing one last refill before we started wiping everything down. The booths near the window were littered with empty coffee cups and half-eaten pastries, but the worst of it was always in the back corner where the bigger tables sat. That was where the study groups liked to gather, and, as usual, they'd left empty cups, notebooks, crumbs, and napkins scattered everywhere. I started cleaning from the back, just trying to get it over with. I was tired and wanted to get home, but when it's busy like that, if you don't clean right away, the mess gets out of control. The cafe had that sort of echo you get when it's empty, just the sound of my footsteps and the low hum of the refrigerator behind the counter. I stacked some chairs on top of one of the tables, then grabbed the broom and started sweeping under the big corner table. When I bent down, I saw a pair of sneakers sticking out from behind the table legs, half hidden by the tablecloth. I straightened up quick, and that's when I noticed him. A middle-aged guy crouched awkwardly under the table, trying to stay as still as possible. At first, I thought he might be some drunk who wandered in, or maybe someone from the mall cleaning crew who got confused. But the way he was curled up back there, hiding, didn't fit either of those. He had dark hair with a little gray in it, a brown jacket, and these old jeans that looked dirty around the knees. When our eyes met, he just stared right back at me. No expression, just this blank look. I remember thinking how strange it was that he didn't say anything at all, not even a startled excuse. His breathing was loud in the quiet room. "Hey, sorry, the cafe's closed now. You can't be in here," I said, keeping my voice steady, not wanting to startle him. He didn't answer or move at first, just kept watching me. I waited another couple seconds, then repeated, "We're closed. You have to leave." Suddenly, he moved. Not slow like someone just waking up, but fast, awkward, like he was trying to figure out which way to bolt. He banged his shoulder on the underside of the table, getting up, knocked over one of the chairs, then scrambled to his feet. His eyes flicked around the room, not really looking at me now, but toward the exits. I stepped back, just a little, letting him have a clear path out. He didn't explain himself or apologize, just darted toward the door, shoes squeaking on the floor. He fumbled with the handle, finally got the door open, and slipped out into the mall corridor. I followed him to make sure he actually left, watching as he disappeared down the hallway toward the parking garage entrance. I locked the main door behind him, then checked the side exits and even the little bathroom in the back, just in case. The whole interaction felt wrong. I knew the mall sometimes had homeless guys come in for warmth, but this was different. Most of the time, if someone gets caught hiding out, they get embarrassed, make excuses. This guy didn't. He just seemed cold and determined to get out without a word. I wondered for a second if maybe he'd stolen something, but nothing seemed to be missing. Still, I couldn't shake that weird feeling. I finished wiping down the tables and swept up the last of the crumbs. The lights over the counter flickered a little, as they always did when I was the last one out. I put the chairs up on all the tables, checked the safe, and took out the garbage. I went out through the employee exit, which opened up into the back parking lot. My sedan was parked near the far edge under one of the big old lamps. The lot was mostly empty, just a couple of other cars near the delivery entrance and some trash blowing around. I walked out, keys in hand, and started heading toward my car. The parking lot always felt colder than the mall itself, and it was darker too, since one of the lights near my usual spot had burned out a week ago. My shoes scraped on the pavement, the sound echoing in the emptiness. I was thinking about how I'd have to call maintenance again about the lights, when I noticed movement in the bushes that lined the edge of the lot. At first, I thought it was an animal. Sometimes stray cats or raccoons rooted around in the trash. But as I got closer, I saw a figure standing up, brushing off leaves. The same guy from earlier stepped out of the shadows, hands shoved into his jacket pockets. He looked at me, then at my car. He walked forward, slow and deliberate. "Hey, can you give me a ride?" "My car broke down," he said, his voice low, not quite meeting my eyes. I stopped walking, tightened my grip on my keys. I glanced behind me, just out of habit, but there was nobody else around. "No, sorry," I said, as calmly as I could, and started moving quicker toward my car. He watched me, but didn't come closer. My heart was pounding, but I kept my head down and walked even faster, reaching my car and fumbling with the keys. He kept following me as I moved faster toward my car. His footsteps were close behind, and I could hear him muttering, something low and angry. I turned around and told him to leave me alone, but he didn't stop. His tone got sharper, and he said, "Come on, just give me a ride. It's not a big deal." He moved a little closer, and I could see his jaw tightening. I took out my phone and said, "I'm calling mall security right now." That made him hesitate. He looked around the lot, glared at me one last time, then ducked back into the bushes, vanishing the way he came. I didn't wait. I jumped in my car, locked the doors, and started the engine with shaking hands. I looked all around the parking lot as I backed out, expecting him to pop up again. When I pulled onto the main road, I grabbed my phone and called mall security anyway, even though I was already gone. I told them what happened, gave them his description, and they said they'd increase patrols around the employee parking area, especially at night. I thanked them, and tried to tell myself it was over, that he'd just been looking for a warm place to sleep or a ride home. But even after I got home, I kept checking the windows. Every shadow on my street seemed sharper than usual. The next week, things started feeling off at work. I was opening the cafe one morning when I looked up from the register and saw him again, this time sitting at one of the food court tables across from us. He was just sitting there with an old newspaper, but I could tell he wasn't reading. He kept glancing over at me through the crowd. I went back to the counter, tried to focus on making coffee, but every time I looked out, he had changed tables, always within sight of our shop. After that, I started noticing him more. He'd be there on my morning shifts, moving from table to table, watching. Some days he'd leave before lunch, other times he'd linger until close. It didn't matter how busy the mall got. He always managed to sit where he could see me. One time, I saw him pretending to mess with his phone, but his eyes kept tracking me. I tried to ignore him and just work, but he was always in my peripheral vision. My coworkers noticed I was jumpier than usual. I tried not to explain, but when one of them saw him staring, I admitted what had happened in the parking lot. I started keeping track of when he came in, writing down the dates and times on my phone. That's when I realized he only showed up when I was working. On my days off, he wasn't there at all. He must have figured out my schedule. Sometimes he'd be waiting when I arrived for the morning shift. Other times, he showed up a few hours later, right after the lunch rush, and stayed until closing. I started worrying that maybe he was coming by when I wasn't there, asking the other employees about me. I reported all of this to my manager and to mall security. They said unless he actually tried to do something, steal, threaten, or cause a scene, there wasn't much they could do. They watched the cameras and said they'd keep an eye out, but he wasn't breaking any rules by sitting in the food court. My manager told me not to walk to my car alone, but that wasn't always possible with our schedules. I started getting paranoid, changing where I parked and trying to leave when there were other people around. One evening, I decided to leave through the main mall entrance instead of the usual employee exit. It was close to closing time, and most of the shoppers were gone. I spotted him by the employee door, standing under the fluorescent light and checking his watch every minute or two, like he was waiting for someone. He kept glancing at the door, then down the hallway, scanning the faces of everyone who passed. He didn't notice me watching from the second floor. That's when I understood he'd been studying my routine for weeks. He wasn't just hanging around randomly. He was tracking my every move, learning when and where I'd show up. After that, I tried everything to avoid being predictable. I changed my shift end times with my manager whenever possible. Sometimes I left 10 minutes early, sometimes I stayed late. I switched between exits and asked coworkers to walk with me when I could. But no matter what I did, it always seemed like he managed to be in the right place at the right time, like he was one step ahead of me. Some days I saw him waiting near the parking lot entrance, looking for my car. Other days, he hung around by the escalators, watching the employee hallway from a distance. Mall security told us to stay alert but said their hands were tied. Every day I checked the cameras, trying to see if he'd followed me into the lot, but sometimes he just disappeared into the crowd. I started getting anxious before every shift, not knowing if he'd show up or not. One night, after a long close, I saw flashing lights in the employee lot. Security cars, red and blue, bouncing off the concrete. I walked over and saw them with a man in handcuffs, sitting on the curb while officers searched his car. I recognized him right away. Turns out, security caught him trying to break into several cars in the lot, starting with one that belonged to a worker from a store 2 doors down. He'd pried open a window and was rifling through the glove box when security spotted him on the cameras. They caught him before he could get away. The police came, and as they searched his car, they found a spiral notebook in the passenger seat. It was filled with names, car descriptions, and shift times for people who worked in the mall. My name was near the top of the list. Next to it was my car make and model, my license plate, and even my home address, which meant at some point, he must have followed me all the way back to my place. The officers questioned everyone who worked that night. They told us he'd been following employees from several stores, tracking their routines, and picking the best time to break into their cars, or worse. They arrested him for stalking and attempted vehicle break-ins. I gave a statement and they told me to stay vigilant. Even after that, I kept switching up my routine, changing parking spots, and checking the rearview mirror before heading home. Now, even after he's gone, I always check over my shoulder when I leave work. I walk fast, keys between my fingers, and I never park in the same spot 2 days in a row. Sometimes I think about how easy it was for him to learn my whole routine just by watching, and how it could have ended up a lot worse if he hadn't been caught when he was. I don't trust empty parking lots anymore. I know now you never really know who's out there watching, waiting, and learning your patterns, just looking for the right moment to make a move. When I lost my job as a barista in Seattle during the 2020 layoffs, everything went downhill fast. For a while, I tried to act like I had it together, but rent was due in a week, and I barely had enough to cover groceries. The coffee shop shut down with almost no warning. I still remember that last shift, scrubbing counters and hoping they'd change their minds. But it was done. My roommate was barely home, working construction, and I didn't want to admit I was jobless. I spent the first couple days just staring at my phone, scrolling through job boards and Craigslist, but nothing panned out. I started picking up little things for cash, selling old lenses, doing deliveries for people I knew. I knew it wouldn't last. I needed something steady. I tried to hold out hope that the shop would call me back, but the days dragged on. One night, I came across a post about selling stock photos online. I'd done some basic photography before, mostly with my phone or an old DSLR. Portraits, city stuff, random candid shots from Capitol Hill. I had thousands of photos just sitting on a hard drive. It didn't sound glamorous, but I figured maybe I could make something out of it. I set up an account on one of those photography social networks. Nothing fancy, but you could list photo sets, portraits, cityscapes, whatever. At first, the only people viewing my page were bots, or maybe other desperate artists. But after a couple days, a user named Art Collector messaged me and bought 3 photos outright. The first sale was $10, then $50 for a set, then another $100 for exclusive rights to an old black and white portrait I'd taken years ago. It didn't make sense. The photo wasn't even that good, just a shot of a friend at the lake. But he paid instantly. I remember thinking maybe I'd gotten lucky, found someone who appreciated my style, or maybe just someone with too much money. I wasn't going to question it, not when the notifications came in saying I'd been paid. The rent was due, and here was someone actually willing to drop money for stuff I would have posted on Instagram for free. I uploaded more. Self-portraits, casual snaps in front of the window, shots from around my apartment. Each time, Art Collector would buy entire sets. Sometimes he messaged to ask if the photo had ever been sold before. If I said no, the price would go up. I told myself this was normal, that some people just wanted exclusive images for their own collection or private projects. But there was something odd about how fast he paid, and how he always wanted more. Never bargaining, just buying. After about a week, I had enough to pay most of my rent. It was more money than I'd ever made from my photos, more than I ever made in tips in a week at the shop. I should have wondered why a stranger would pay so much for simple portraits. But every time I went to question it, another payment would show up. The photo requests got longer. He'd ask for specific moods or settings, or message late at night asking for whole new sets. I didn't say no. Not then. He started asking for more details about the photos too. He wanted to know what camera I used, what room I was in, if the photos were taken the same day or not. Once he sent me a list of the shots he liked best, and they were always the most personal ones. Photos taken at home, with my own stuff in the background, little details I never paid attention to before. My kitchen table, my bathroom mirror, a chipped mug. It started to feel strange, but every time I hesitated, I thought about the money. I figured if I didn't do it, someone else would. Rent was due again in 3 weeks, and the shops in Seattle weren't hiring. A month in, things got even weirder. Art collectors started messaging me directly, asking if I could do more personalized shoots. "Would you wear your favorite outfit?" he asked, offering a few $100s more if I could send photos with a handwritten signature in the frame. "Maybe take a few in your bedroom or by your window at night with the city lights." The requests always seemed a little too personal. He started asking for specific details. "Would you mind holding up a sign with your name?" At first, I said no, but when he doubled the payment, I gave in. I needed the money. The requests kept coming, more intimate every time, and the money just kept getting better. He started sending lists, outfits he wanted, certain objects from my apartment, angles that showed more of the space. Sometimes he wanted the shots taken at a certain hour. "Golden hour is best," he'd write, or maybe late at night, by your desk lamp. I convinced myself it was all for some art project, maybe something he was collecting for a private gallery. He paid me thousands of dollars for one set where I just sat at my kitchen table, writing my name on a piece of paper and smiling at the camera. Then he wanted video. "Just a thank you message," he said. "Nothing too fancy." I set up my phone, said his screen name out loud, and thanked him for his support. Each time, he'd send more money. He asked for more photos in my bedroom, more with my face visible, more details that made it clear where I lived. He wanted full names written out, sometimes even asking me to talk about myself on camera. "Tell me about your day, your plans, your dreams for the future." He said it was just for his private collection, but it felt invasive. The shoots went from simple self-portraits to videos in my pajamas, shots with my feet up on the couch, candid angles in my kitchen and bathroom. He even asked for a photo of me brushing my teeth. I kept telling myself that it was fine, that nobody else cared, that as long as he paid, I could handle it. But the messages kept coming, always pushing for more. He started asking about other people I could photograph, friends, roommates, even family. When I said I lived alone, he said that was even better for creative freedom. He asked for photos in every room of the apartment and wanted to see the view from my window. The requests felt like a test to see how far I'd go. I ignored how uncomfortable I was because the payments kept me afloat. I needed every cent, so I agreed to each new request, even when he wanted photos of me in bed or shots of my bathroom with the door open. Each time, he said it was for his private collection, and each time, the money was too good to turn down. Looking back, I can see how he was testing my boundaries, seeing how far I'd go if the price was high enough. I did almost everything he asked, because at the time, I thought I had no choice. After Sarah and I started dating, I felt like things were finally looking up. I'd saved a little money from the photo sales and was starting to get some small but honest jobs with local businesses. Pet portraits, real estate shots, simple stuff. Sarah was supportive and easy to talk to, and I didn't want any more secrets between us. So I decided to cut ties with Art Collector for good. I wrote him a straightforward message through the photo platform. I told him I appreciated his business, but I was moving in a new direction and focusing on commercial work. I wished him well and blocked his account. It took less than a day for him to respond. The first email came in the middle of the night, a screenshot of my own photos, my name in bold over the images. His message was cold. He said if I didn't keep working with him, he would publish everything on adult sites, with my real name and social media linked. At first, I thought he was bluffing, but within a week, I started hearing from people I hadn't talked to in years. Old classmates messaged me asking about my new side business. My cousin called, confused by a friend request from a profile with my face but a different name and a lot of explicit photos only art collector would have. Sarah got messages from fake accounts pretending to be me, asking her to send private photos in return. When I tried to report and delete the accounts, 3 more would pop up the next day. There were profiles with my face on dating apps I never used, with captions and chat logs I never wrote. One even used my real address as a location tag. The only thing all the fake accounts had in common were the photos I'd sold to art collector, twisted just enough to seem like I was selling myself online. My family started getting strange texts and emails. Some of my friends started ignoring me, blocking my number without saying why. One day I came home to find Sarah in tears, scrolling through dozens of messages from strangers asking about her boyfriend's services. She said, "Did you ever send these out?" I told her the truth. She believed me, but things felt broken after that. He didn't stop there. The emails got more aggressive. One afternoon, he sent me a list of demands. Keep doing photo shoots, send more intimate photos, and this time send screenshots of every conversation between me and Sarah. I deleted the message, blocked every new account he made, but he'd just start over with new ones. He found my number somehow. I'd get calls at 2 a.m., 3 a.m., 4 a.m., always from different numbers. Sometimes he'd stay silent on the line. Sometimes he'd just breathe and hang up. Sometimes I'd hear my own voice, clips from the thank you videos I sent him, played back at me through the phone. It was like he had access to everything. He threatened to send videos to my work contacts, to my landlord, to anyone he could find in my life. Sarah started getting calls too. He said her name, her workplace, even described our apartment building in detail. I tried to wipe every social media account I had. I deleted old photos, shut down my main pages, but he just kept making more fakes. Every time I thought I'd found them all, a new one would pop up. The stress was getting to Sarah. She started sleeping at her sister's place. I couldn't blame her. I felt like I was dragging her into something that should have stopped the moment I blocked him. I didn't know what else to do. One night I just walked to the police station and told them everything. The officer behind the counter handed me a stack of forms and told me to file a report with the cyber crimes unit. A detective called me 2 days later. She sounded tired. She told me, "You're not alone. This is common. People like this look for anyone struggling with money, especially in creative fields." She said they would try to trace the accounts, but it could take a long time. The emails, she explained, were being routed through a dozen countries. I gave her everything: emails, screenshots, audio files, even the messages Sarah received. She asked if I'd ever given him my address or full name. I told her I hadn't, but maybe he figured it out from little things in my photos. An envelope on my kitchen table, the view from my window. She said, "That's how they operate. They build a map of your life from scraps." The investigation dragged on for months. Every couple of weeks, the detective would call to ask about any new incidents, any more threats. I changed my phone number, but the calls kept coming from blocked and spoofed numbers. I moved most of my stuff into storage and started couch surfing with friends while I looked for another place. Sarah and I were still together, but we barely saw each other. She was scared. I didn't blame her. At least twice, I saw someone watching our building from a parked car. I never knew if it was him or just my nerves. Eventually, the detective called with news. They'd traced the art collector account to a man living in another state, someone who had already been investigated for cyberstalking in the past, but never charged. They were building a case, but needed more. I sent everything I had, signed affidavits, forwarded every new message. I changed my email, set up every privacy setting I could find, and still, I barely slept at night. I started working from my laptop in coffee shops on the other side of the city, always looking over my shoulder. Months passed before anything changed. Then, one morning, I got a call. The detective said they had enough evidence. They'd arrested him for extortion and cyber harassment, and he wasn't just targeting me. There were at least 4 other photographers involved, people who'd sold him photos, then been threatened the same way. He'd kept logs, photos, fake profiles, everything on his computer. The police showed up at my old apartment to ask more questions, but I had already moved. I'd left no forwarding address, just in case. Even after his arrest, I had to get a new number and a new email. I moved again, across town this time, and never told anyone except Sarah and my boss. I checked every week to make sure no new profiles had popped up with my name or photo. Sarah stayed with me, but we both knew things were different. We tried to rebuild, and slowly, we did. I found steady work as a graphic designer with a small local firm. No more stock photography, no more public posts with my face. I learned that people like Art Collector don't pick their victims at random. They look for people who are desperate, who need money fast, who are willing to give up a little privacy for a big payout. I never thought it would happen to me. Now I don't post anything personal online, not a single photo, not even my real name. I keep every account locked down and never answer messages from people I don't know. It changed the way I see everyone online. If someone seems too generous, if they want too much, if they ask for things that feel just a little off, it's always building towards something worse. The only thing I trust now is my gut. If something feels wrong, I back out. No amount of money is worth what I went through. I was working late that night, fixing power lines that got knocked out from the hurricane. The city had me running all over, block after block, climbing poles in the dark, messing with wet wires while the wind still made the trees shake. By the time I finished the last call, I was soaked and dirty, and all I wanted was a hot shower and some food. It was around 10 p.m. when I finally drove back through my neighborhood. Every house on the street was dark. No porch lights, no TVs flickering in the windows, not even the street lights working. The storm must have taken the whole grid down. It made the street look different, almost empty. My boots sounded too loud on the wet concrete as I walked up to my door. Inside, it was thick dark. I had a couple candles in a drawer for storms like this, so I lit them and set them in the kitchen. The room got a soft orange glow. I dumped my gear near the back door, took off my jacket, and started thinking about what I could eat. There was some leftover pizza in the fridge. I was about to grab it when I heard a sharp, quick noise, glass breaking from the back of the house. I froze. For a second, I wondered if the wind had knocked something over, but the sound was too clear. Not like a picture frame falling. It was a window, definitely a window. I picked up my flashlight from the counter and went to the back hallway. The kitchen window that faced the backyard was shattered. The glass was scattered on the linoleum, some of it still clinging to the edges of the frame. Cold air blew through. My backyard gate was swinging open, and the grass was flattened near the fence, muddy prints leading up to the house. Somebody had broken in. They could still be here. I listened, holding my breath, trying to hear anything, movement, footsteps, a voice. But the house was dead silent. I backed away from the broken window and moved down the hall. The light from the flashlight shook a little in my hand. I went to the closet in the hallway and pulled out my old aluminum baseball bat. I hadn't used it in years, but it felt solid. I gripped it tight and started moving through the house, room by room. I opened the bathroom door first. Nothing, just towels on the floor, shower curtain half pulled down. I checked the small bedroom next, pushing the door open fast, shining my light into the corners. No one there, but the closet door was cracked open. I walked over and opened it fully, just my old coats and some storage bins. Every sound seemed too loud. The creak of the door, my shoes scraping on the hardwood. I moved through the hallway, passing my bedroom. The door was halfway closed. I pushed it open with the end of the bat, light swinging over the bed, the dresser, the pile of laundry on the chair. Nothing. My window was still shut, but the air felt colder in here too. Maybe it was just my imagination, but I thought I heard something shift in the walls. I went over to the closet, opened it quick. No one inside. I closed it softly and went back to the hall, my grip tight on the bat. Back in the living room, I noticed something wasn't right. The TV was sitting at an angle, like it had been pulled halfway off the stand. The cables from my old stereo system were hanging loose, some of them trailing on the rug. Whoever came in here must have been trying to disconnect everything in a hurry. My game console was unplugged, the controller on the floor. I knelt down to check if anything was missing, but it looked like they'd been interrupted. Maybe they saw the headlights from my truck when I pulled in and decided to bolt before they could finish. I walked around the couch and checked the window facing the street. It was still locked, but there was a muddy shoe print on the windowsill outside. Whoever broke in probably tried to get out fast when they heard the front door open. I kept telling myself they were gone, that I was just searching an empty house. But then, from upstairs, I heard footsteps. Heavy, slow steps, one after another, moving across the floor above my head. My stomach dropped. I held the bat tighter and stood there for a second, just listening. The steps stopped, then started again, crossing from one side of the upstairs hall to the other. There was no way I was going up there. I thought about what was even up there. Just my bedroom closet and the small storage room at the end of the hall, full of old tools and boxes. It would be easy for someone to hide. I tried to remember if I had locked the upstairs window, but my mind was blank. Instead of charging up, I stepped quietly backward into the kitchen, keeping my eyes on the stairs. I set the bat down and pulled my phone from my pocket. The battery was low, but I still had a signal. I moved slowly to the back door, careful not to make noise. I kept listening, but all I could hear was my own breathing. I eased open the back door, stepped out into the cold, and closed it behind me. I walked around the side of the house toward my truck, keeping low in the shadows. The rain had started up again, steady and cold. Once I was sure I was outside and alone, I dialed 911. I told them someone was in my house, that I'd just come home from work and caught them in the act. I kept my voice low, eyes on the upstairs windows, waiting for any movement. I stepped quietly off my porch, moving slow so I wouldn't draw attention if anyone was watching. The rain was coming down harder, drumming on the empty street and pooling at the edges of the driveway. My boots made no sound as I walked across my yard and cut over to the neighbor's house directly across the road. Their porch light was off, but I could see the faint flicker of candles through the front window. I tapped gently on the door, glancing back at my own house to check the windows. I saw nothing, just darkness. My neighbor answered after a few seconds, surprised to see me standing there with my jacket soaked and water running off my hair. I kept my voice low and told him someone had broken into my house and was still inside. His wife stepped back and let me in. They still had an old landline phone plugged into the wall in their kitchen. I grabbed it and dialed 911, telling the dispatcher exactly what was happening, that there was an intruder in my house right now, and I had just left to be safe. The dispatcher said officers were on their way, but there were delays because of downed trees and blocked roads from the hurricane. They told me to stay put and wait somewhere safe. I sat with my neighbors in the kitchen, staring through the rain-blurred window at my house. It was still completely dark, except for the faint orange of my candles downstairs. We waited, barely speaking. The wind rattled the siding, making it hard to listen for anything. 10, 15, 20 minutes crawled by. Then, in the upstairs window, I saw a flicker of light, a flashlight beam moving around my bedroom, slow and searching. I pointed it out to my neighbor, and we all watched, waiting for something else to happen. My heart was racing. Every second felt too long. Just when I started to think the police would never come, I heard the sound of sirens coming from the main road. 2 squad cars pulled up to the curb outside my house, blue and red lights flashing on the wet pavement. The officers moved fast, splitting up and circling the house with their own flashlights. They shouted warnings, then went inside, one at the front and one at the back. We all stood at the window, holding our breath. A few minutes later, they came back out, radios crackling, one of them waving his light toward the backyard. They called in to the dispatcher, then came over to my neighbor's house to get my statement. I walked out to meet them, still clutching the bat I'd brought with me. The officer said my house was empty now. Whoever had been inside was gone, probably slipped out through the back fence as soon as they saw the police cars pulling up. We all went over together. The cops checked every room again, then took a look at the damage. The kitchen window was still broken, glass scattered on the floor and mud smeared on the windowsill. The living room was just as I'd left it, TV half pulled out and wires still hanging loose. Upstairs, my bedroom door was wide open. My laptop was gone from the desk, and my tablet was missing from the nightstand. There were muddy footprints on the floor, tracing a path from the window all the way to the stairs. In the closet, things had been tossed around and one drawer left open, clothes spilling out onto the floor. The cop followed the trail of prints, shining his flashlight across the carpet. The tracks led to the window at the end of the hallway, then down the back stairs. He opened the back door and looked out. The rain had washed away most of the footprints outside, but you could still see the deep marks in the mud leading straight to the back fence. Another officer found the side gate swinging open, almost off its hinges. I looked over at the fence and saw a spot where the mud was packed down, showing where someone had climbed over into the alley behind the houses. The officer checked with his partner, then turned to me and said that someone had used the blackout to hit houses in the neighborhood. He told me there had already been 2 other break-ins on nearby streets that night. All of them were houses without power, with people either gone or just coming home late. The burglars had waited until the storm took down the lines, then started hitting houses they knew would be dark and easy to move through without being seen. One of the cops said he'd seen this before, people driving through neighborhoods during blackouts and picking targets. He thought they might have been watching the area for days, just waiting for a chance to move in when things got bad. He took my statement and told me to call if I remembered anything else. They drove up and down the block, checking yards and shining lights into the alleys. But by then, the burglar was long gone. I stood on my porch and watched the squad cars move away, the flashing lights fading into the wet dark. The next day, a detective came by to follow up. He walked through the house, asked for serial numbers on my laptop and tablet, then wrote down a list of everything missing. He told me it was likely an organized crew, people who targeted neighborhoods during big storms and outages, knowing police would be busy everywhere and people would be distracted with damage and cleanup. He said it was a pattern that had happened in other towns, with groups moving from place to place and never staying long enough to get caught. He admitted the odds of finding my stuff were low, since most of it would be gone in a day or two, sold off or traded before anyone could trace it. I spent that day sweeping up glass and picking through what was left of my things. I found some of my drawers dumped out on the floor, a couple of broken picture frames, but nothing else missing. The rain had finally stopped, and power crews were working on the lines at the end of the street. All afternoon, I watched the neighbors talking outside in little groups, everyone swapping stories about what they saw or heard during the night. No one had seen the burglar leave my house, and nobody saw which way he went after jumping the fence. It felt like everyone was waiting for the next hit, worried the thieves might come back. That night, I drove out to the big hardware store and bought new locks, a battery-powered alarm system, and 2 motion sensor lights that could run for days without electricity. I installed everything myself before dark. Every time the wind picked up or a branch hit the roof, I found myself checking the windows and watching the fence out back. I didn't sleep much that week. The detective called once more to say they had no leads, and the break-ins had stopped as soon as the power came back on for the neighborhood. I never got my stuff back, and they never caught the person who broke into my house. After that, every time there was a storm warning, I packed up and went to stay with my brother in the next town over, where the lines were newer and the neighborhood stayed lit up even in bad weather. I learned how fast things could fall apart when everything you rely on stops working at once. When the power goes out and everyone's distracted, you become an easy target. Now I watch the weather, pay attention to who's around, and I don't take any chances. If there's another big storm, I won't be home to find out what's waiting in the dark. I was working as a cook at this family restaurant called Mama Rosa's in a small Oregon town. Most nights there were 4 of us in the kitchen, but that Thursday, it was just me. 2 of the waitresses left around 9, and the last guy on the shift, Pete, finished the mopping and said goodnight at about 9:30. I was the one stuck closing, wiping down the stove, and doing the inventory for the freezer. Mama Rosa's isn't some big place, just 6 booths, a counter, and a tiny back room for storage. All the lights in the dining area were off, except for one above the register. I kept the kitchen radio on low so I wouldn't get creeped out being in there by myself. It was already past 10, and I just wanted to get home. But the phone rang. I was stacking takeout boxes and grabbed it without even checking the number. The guy on the other end sounded out of breath. He said he wanted a large pizza, extra cheese, and asked how long delivery would take. I said 30 minutes, maybe a little longer since we were closing soon. When I asked for his address, there was just silence. I waited, and then he hung up. Just a deadline. It wasn't the first weird call I got. Sometimes bored kids would order a bunch of food to random addresses or say something gross and hang up. I figured it was just that. I kept working, rinsing the sinks, pulling the garbage out to the alley behind the kitchen. The night air was cold, and the street outside was quiet. Just the sound of a couple cars on the main road and a dog barking somewhere far away. When I went back inside, I checked the doors, front and back, like I always do. Both locked. I put the last of the pans away, checked the register totals, and started sweeping. I kept glancing at the clock, counting down the minutes until I could leave. It was just after 10:30 when the bell on the front door jingled. That surprised me. I was sure I'd locked it, but sometimes the bolt sticks and doesn't go all the way. I poked my head out into the dining room, expecting maybe a late regular who forgot something or a kid from the bar next door looking for change. But instead, this guy walks in, tall, maybe over 6 feet, wearing an old sports jacket that looked 2 sizes too big. He had sunglasses on, even though it was pitch black outside. He moved slow, shoulders hunched up, and kept looking over his shoulder at the street like someone might be following him. He stood there, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. I stayed behind the counter and asked if he needed anything. He didn't answer right away, just stood there near the door like he couldn't decide if he was coming in or going out. I asked again, louder, if he wanted to order. He started moving toward the counter, but then stopped at the first booth and kind of sat down on the edge of the seat, hands in his jacket pockets. The way he kept glancing at the windows made the hairs stand up on the back of my neck. I could see his jaw clenching, a muscle jumping in his cheek. He didn't look homeless or drunk, but something about him was off. I couldn't see his eyes behind the glasses, but his mouth kept twitching. I was trying to figure out if I should just tell him to leave. It was late, and we were technically closed, so I told him we weren't taking orders anymore. He finally mumbled something I couldn't make out and started tapping his foot, fast and uneven on the tile. When I asked if he was picking up an order, he just gave me this weird look, like he didn't expect the question. He said, "Yeah, something like that," but his voice was shaky, and he kept fiddling with the zipper on his jacket. I stepped back a bit and kept the counter between us. That's when I noticed his right hand, shaking a little, and as he shifted, I saw the handle of a knife sticking out of his jacket pocket. Not a kitchen knife, but the kind people keep for protection. Dark handle, a little worn at the end. I felt my heart beating in my neck, but I tried not to let it show. I glanced at the phone on the wall, wondering if I could grab it in time. He was sweating, even though it was cold inside. His words slurred together, and I caught something like, "Should have been quicker," before he started mumbling to himself, barely moving his lips. There was a smell coming off him, not alcohol, but something sharp and chemical, like the cleaning products we use, but more sour. I realized the phone call earlier and this guy showing up were probably connected. My brain went through the facts. Late night, weird call, now a man who looks like he's about to lose it. He probably called first to see if anyone would answer, to make sure there was just one person working late. I looked at the clock again. 10:40. The street outside was empty, and the other shops were closed. The only light was from the neon sign in our window and the yellow glow from the kitchen. The man started rocking a little in his seat, gripping the table with one hand and the knife handle with the other. His foot tapped faster. I kept my distance, moving slowly toward the kitchen door, not turning my back to him. The sound of the radio in the kitchen felt way too loud now, but I didn't want to make a move to shut it off. He was watching me now, eyes behind those dark glasses, tracking every step I made. I didn't say anything else, just waited to see what he would do next, hoping he wouldn't pull the knife out all the way. I tried to stay calm and act normal while figuring out how to get out of this situation. The guy kept inching closer to the counter, glancing back and forth between me and the door, muttering to himself. His breathing got loud, like he was working himself up to something. I moved slowly toward the kitchen, pretending to check something on the stove, but always keeping him in my sight. My mind raced through possible ways to get out. A back exit, the fire extinguisher, maybe locking myself in the freezer if things went bad. But every time I looked at the phone, I could feel his eyes following mine, like he knew what I was thinking. He started tapping the knife handle on the countertop, staring at me through those sunglasses. His voice was barely above a whisper, but I heard him say, "Come on, hurry up, don't make me wait all night." I could see his hands were shaking even more. I wiped my palms on my apron, forced myself to stay quiet. The restaurant felt smaller with every second, the silence broken only by the ticking clock and the hum of the soda machine. I tried to remember how many people might still be around outside, if anyone could hear me if I yelled. Suddenly, the bell on the door jingled again. An elderly couple walked in, bundled in thick jackets and looking surprised to see the lights still on. They were regulars, Mr. and Mrs. Dunn, and every Thursday they picked up lasagna for their daughter. Mrs. Dunn smiled and waved. "Sorry, are you still open?" The man in the jacket froze for a second. His jaw clenched, and he started breathing faster. He took a step back from the counter, and for the first time, I saw fear instead of aggression on his face. He spun around and bolted out the door without another word, bumping into Mr. Dunn's shoulder on his way out. The couple looked confused, watching him disappear down the street. My hands shook as I grabbed the phone and called 911, my voice cracking as I told the dispatcher what happened. The elderly couple stayed close, Mrs. Dunn squeezing my shoulder, Mr. Dunn keeping watch at the window. I gave the police a full description: height, build, jacket, the knife, the sunglasses at night. The couple confirmed everything I said, adding their own details about the way he moved and talked. When the officers arrived, they took our statements and checked the area. One of them said there had been a string of robberies at small restaurants in town, always late at night, always places with only one person working. The thieves usually called ahead to make sure the place was empty except for one staff member. They told me they'd increase patrols in the area and asked me to warn other restaurant owners about what happened. They took the tape from the security camera and said they'd circulate the suspect's description. I never saw the guy again, and for the rest of that week, nobody else reported a robbery. Things eventually went back to normal, but not quite the same as before. Mama Rosa came in the next morning and heard the whole story. She called a locksmith to fix the sticky lock, and by that weekend there was a panic button installed behind the counter. She changed the closing policy. Nobody works alone after 9 anymore. The staff would always double up on late shifts, and if someone had to leave early, the kitchen closed up with them. That elderly couple still comes in every Thursday, and every time I see them, I think about how things could have gone if they hadn't shown up right then. They probably saved my life just by walking in at the right moment. I started trusting my gut after that night. If a customer seems off or something feels wrong, I don't wait and see anymore. I learned that criminals often call ahead to check how many people are working. And if you're ever alone at work late at night and get a weird phone call followed by a suspicious customer, don't hesitate to call for help immediately. Some things you can't just shake off or explain away. Sometimes, listening to your instincts is the only thing that keeps you safe. So when I was 19, me and 3 friends were driving back from Alaska where we'd worked at a fish cannery all summer. We'd been up there a little over 2 months, living in a shared trailer, working 6 days a week. The money was okay, not great, but I was glad to be heading home. The drive was long. It was me, Dave, Mike, and Sergio. And we'd been taking turns behind the wheel, making stops wherever we could find something cheap. That night, we'd crossed the border into Canada and were looking for somewhere to crash. By the time we pulled into this little roadside motel, it was almost midnight and everyone was wiped out. The motel was the kind of place with brown carpets, faded paint, and a flickering neon sign. When we checked in, the desk clerk looked half asleep. She handed us an old key with a plastic tag and pointed to a room near the end. "Don't park by the dumpsters. Raccoons get in the cars," she said. So we parked under a streetlight, just trying to keep the car in view from our window. We only had 1 bag each and locked everything else in the trunk, just in case. In the room, the air was stale and there was a buzzing sound from the fridge. I set my phone alarm for 7 a.m. and crashed on one of the double beds without even changing my clothes. The next morning, I woke up to Dave cursing from the parking lot. He was already out by the car, standing with his arms crossed. Mike and Sergio were still half asleep, but I threw on a hoodie and went out. The driver's side mirror was hanging by a few wires, cracked and bent backwards. The glass was smashed, probably hit by a truck or something. No note, no apology, just the damage. There was some mud on the door too, and the side panel looked scraped up. Dave kicked at a bit of broken glass on the ground and said we could just tape it up, but Mike shook his head. If we try to cross the border like this, they'll turn us around, Mike said. He was right too. I'd heard stories about Canadian border police being strict, and we needed that mirror to pass inspection. The motel clerk was behind the desk, counting bills when I came in. I asked if she knew a place to get the mirror fixed. She barely looked up. "You want Jack Miller," she said, her voice flat. "He's the only one around here deals in used car parts. Works out past the lumberyard." She pulled out a piece of motel stationery and started sketching a map. Her pen scratched across the paper as she drew a couple lines, marked an X, and handed it to me. "He's about 30 minutes out. Road gets rough, so take it slow." I took the map back to the car. Dave and Sergio were arguing, Dave wanting to just use some duct tape and get moving, Sergio saying he'd chip in for a new mirror if that's what it took. Mike folded up the map and started the car, saying we'd just check it out, see if the guy even had the part. The morning was cold, a low fog on the road, and my hands felt stiff as I climbed in. None of us had eaten yet, but the plan was to fix the car and get breakfast after. We pulled out of the motel lot, following the clerk's map, and headed down a 2-lane highway that wound through pine trees and faded barns. The farther we drove, the more empty everything looked. We passed maybe 2 houses, both with overgrown yards and trucks on blocks. The road narrowed and the pavement turned to gravel, rattling the car. The map said to look for a sign nailed to a post, but I almost missed it. The words, "Jack Miller, Auto Salvage," barely visible under flaking white paint. Dave slowed down, turning onto a dirt track lined with puddles and muddy ruts. We crawled along, branches scraping the sides, until the woods opened up into a clearing. The place looked more like a junkyard than a business. There were piles of rusted car parts everywhere. Hoods, doors, fenders, stacked 6 feet high in some spots. A caved-in trailer sat to one side, with the windows boarded up. A little farther in was a wooden shack with a tin roof, sagging to one side. A battered pickup was parked out front, mud splattered up to the windows. The ground was all puddles, old tires scattered around, and there was an oil drum tipped on its side with black sludge leaking into the dirt. Sergio whispered, "This doesn't look like the kind of place that's on Google Maps." We sat in the car for a minute, no one wanting to get out first. Then the shack's door creaked open, and a man stepped out onto the porch. He looked to be about 50, gray stubble, thick work jacket, and faded jeans. He squinted at us like he wasn't sure if we were customers or just lost. Dave rolled down his window, called out, "You Jack Miller?" The man nodded once and started walking over, wiping his hands on a rag. He moved slow, but kept his eyes on us the whole way. I climbed out first, holding up the broken mirror. "We had an accident," I said, looking for a side mirror for a '96 Camry. Jack nodded, taking the piece from my hand, turning it over. He didn't say much, just asked what year and model. "Might have something," he said, voice rough. "Wait here." He ducked back inside the shack. Mike lit a cigarette, tapping his foot. "We should keep an eye on the car," he said, glancing at the piles of scrap. A few minutes later, Jack came back out, and this time, 2 other men followed behind him. Both looked rough. One had a shaved head and faded tattoos on his neck. The other wore a dirty ball cap and had a big scar along his jaw. They didn't say anything, just stood behind Jack, watching us. Jack's whole tone changed. He handed me the broken mirror and crossed his arms. "So," he said. "Where you boys headed?" He looked right at me, then at Dave, who just shrugged. "Back to the States," Dave said, trying to keep it light. Jack didn't smile. "Long way from home. You camping out, or you got cash for a hotel every night?" Mike tensed up, shifting his weight. The man with the scar spit on the ground, looking over our car, checking out the tires and the trunk. Jack's eyes lingered on the sticker on our back window. "You driving straight through or stopping around here?" he asked. The men behind him were getting closer now, one of them circling around toward our trunk. Jack leaned in a little. "What about cash? You carrying much? Roadside like this, people got to be careful." He was smiling now, but there was nothing friendly in it. I could hear Sergio's breathing picking up behind me. No one laughed or answered. Jack just stood there waiting. Jack kept insisting I come inside the shack for coffee, acting like he was being hospitable, but there was something off about the way he said it. He didn't make it a question, just sort of stood there blocking the way back to the car, repeating, "Come inside. Let's talk." I tried to be polite, said we were in a hurry and just wanted to get the part, but he didn't move. Meanwhile, the two tattooed men were wandering around our car, not even pretending to look for a mirror anymore. One of them leaned against the trunk, the other squatted by the back tire, poking around in the dirt. The guy with the scar called out to Lisa, who was sitting in the back seat with the door cracked open, saying, "Where you all from? You got family in the States? You traveling with anyone else?" His eyes didn't leave her once, and his questions were way too personal for someone who was just supposed to be finding us a car mirror. Dave stepped closer to me and muttered under his breath, "We need to go." He glanced at Mike, who was keeping his distance near the front of the car, arms crossed and jaw set. Sergio was fidgeting with his backpack, pretending to look for something but really just stalling, hoping for an excuse to leave. I tried to keep things normal, asked Jack if he had a price in mind for the mirror, but he just grinned and said, "Let's talk inside. I gotta check my stock." Behind him, the so-called stock was just a field of twisted metal and broken glass. No shelves, no labels, nothing that looked like it belonged to a real business. Jack stepped closer, so close I could smell the old cigarette smoke on his jacket. "Come on, it'll only take a minute," he said. I shook my head and took a step back, trying to angle toward the car. That's when I noticed the other two men weren't even pretending to search anymore. One was digging through a pile of tires, but every so often he'd look over at Dave and Mike, just watching. My gut was screaming at me that we needed to get out, that whatever was happening here wasn't about a car mirror anymore. Lisa had been half asleep in the back seat, head against the window, when all of a sudden she let out a scream that made everyone jump. One of the tattooed men had yanked her door open and was reaching for her arm, pulling hard. She twisted away, kicking at him and shouting, "Let me go!" I dropped everything and ran to the car, Sergio right behind me, as Dave and Mike bolted from the front. Lisa was scrambling out the other side, pushing past the driver's seat, and landed hard on the gravel. The man tried to follow, but Mike shoved him back and slammed the door. That's when Dave spotted the metal spikes. They'd been set out under all four tires, rusty, thick, bent nails welded to strips of metal, hidden just enough that you wouldn't see them until it was too late. Dave yelled, "Spike! They're trying to trap us!" Mike started kicking the spikes away, scooping them up with his boot and tossing them into the weeds, while I helped Lisa up and shoved her toward the passenger side. The air felt charged, like something was about to snap. Jack started yelling at his guys, barking orders, his whole fake friendly mask gone. "What the hell are you doing?" he shouted, but the men didn't answer. They just looked at each other, then back at us, cold and silent. One of them started circling around behind the car, hands in his pockets, while the other crouched low, blocking the driver's door. Sergio grabbed the handle and yanked the door open, forcing the man to back up. I shoved Lisa inside and scrambled in after her. Dave dove behind the wheel and slammed the key into the ignition. Mike slid into the back seat, practically sitting on top of our bags, as Sergio dove in beside him. Jack disappeared into the shack, slamming the door so hard the walls shook. Seconds later, he came back out with a hunting rifle, raising it to his shoulder and shouting for us to stop. Dave didn't hesitate. He threw the car into reverse, floored it, and the tires spun, throwing up rocks and mud. Jack fired a shot, but it went wide, shattering glass somewhere in the junkyard. The car bounced hard over the gravel, one tire clipping a spike with a dull thud. Mike kept kicking at the last of the spikes as we lurched forward, and I could hear Lisa sobbing, clutching at the door handle. Jack's men ran after us, yelling and cursing, but we were already picking up speed. We shot out onto the dirt track, fishtailing around the bend, branches scraping the sides. Jack fired again, the shot echoing off the trees, but the car kept going. Dave didn't slow down until we hit the main road, tires thumping onto the pavement, the whole car rattling. Nobody spoke until we'd put a few miles between us and that junkyard. Sergio finally broke the silence, voice shaking. What the hell was that? No one had an answer. When we reached the next town, we found a police station and told them everything. The officer on duty listened, nodded, and said quietly that we weren't the first people to come in with a story like this. He explained that the area was known for car theft rings, and that travelers were an easy target. Guys like Jack would lure people in with cheap parts, then either rob them outright or steal their vehicles and sell them across the border. We'd been lucky. If Lisa hadn't screamed, if Dave hadn't spotted the spikes, if any one of us had gone into that shack alone, it could have ended differently. After that, we bought a roll of duct tape at a gas station, taped up the mirror, and got out of Canada as fast as we could. I still think about that day, about how normal it all seemed until it wasn't. Now, I never trust an isolated repair shop or a stranger's directions. I never hitchhike, and I never ever let my guard down on the road. When I was 17, me and my roommate Jessica decided to hitchhike to Westfield Mall from our college dorm outside Houston. It was late April, just after midterms. I remember we'd blown through most of our money that week on takeout and some concert tickets, and the bus fare to the mall seemed like a waste just for a window shopping trip. It was hot, not summer yet, but sticky enough to make jeans uncomfortable. The walk to the highway took us past a long stretch of cracked sidewalk, broken chain-link fences, and a tire shop with faded yellow letters. Jessica was laughing about something that happened in class, and we were both carrying cheap nylon tote bags for the stuff we hoped to buy. I'd never hitchhiked before, but Jessica said she'd done it back home with her cousin. She made it sound easy, said we just needed to look friendly and stand by the on-ramp, thumbs out. We stood there for maybe 10 minutes, cars passing, some slowing down, most ignoring us. It was late morning, so the rush hour was over, but there was still a steady flow of traffic. I remember the sun burning the back of my neck and the little flutter in my stomach every time a car slowed down just a bit. Finally, a faded blue Ford sedan with one of those pine tree air fresheners hanging from the mirror pulled over to the curb. The driver rolled down the window and leaned over. He was probably in his late 40s, thinning hair, clean-shaven, wearing a pale blue button-down shirt with a tie that was a little crooked. I remember thinking he looked like one of my old teachers. "Where you girls headed?" he asked, and Jessica told him, "Westfield Mall if you're going that way." He smiled and said, "Yeah, sure, hop in. I'm headed up that direction anyway." Jessica climbed in the front seat, tossing her tote onto the floor, and I slid into the back behind her. The inside of the car smelled like old coffee and that fake pine scent, and there were fast food wrappers stuffed into the door pocket. He had a big plastic bottle of water in the cup holder, and the AC was blowing, but only a little. I remember glancing at the dashboard and seeing a faded picture of a little kid stuck next to the speedometer. Jessica buckled her seatbelt and looked back at me, giving a little shrug like, "This is fine." The man put the car in gear and merged back onto the road, making small talk about the weather and asking if we went to the college nearby. Jessica told him we were freshmen, just bored and wanting to shop. He nodded, eyes flicking up to the mirror for a second. At first, it just felt awkward, like any time you get into a stranger's car. But after a minute, his questions started to get more personal. He asked if we lived in the dorms, and Jessica said yeah. Then he wanted to know which building. Jessica just said, "The red one," and tried to laugh it off. He kept glancing in the rearview mirror, eyes settling on Jessica, then shifting to me for a second, then back. "You girls got boyfriends?" he asked suddenly. Jessica gave a half smile and shook her head. I just looked out the window, trying not to meet his gaze in the mirror. The car felt smaller with the way his voice carried, and I noticed him driving a little slower than the rest of the cars, like he was in no hurry. He said something about his own daughter being about our age, but the way he said it didn't sound right. He asked what we were studying, if we were planning to go home for the summer, if our parents let us come to Houston alone. Jessica's hands were tight on her tote bag, and I started fiddling with my phone, even though I knew I had no service on that stretch of highway. Every time Jessica shifted her legs, his eyes dropped from the road to her knees, and then slowly back up. The mall was still at least 15 minutes away, and the way he kept glancing at us in the mirror made my skin crawl. Jessica tried to steer the conversation back to safe topics, but he'd always find a way to bring it back to us, where we lived, who we knew, what we did for fun. He smiled, but it was never at the right time, like he was rehearsing some joke in his head. I kept my eyes on the side window, counting the highway signs, wishing we'd just waited for the bus. Jessica and I exchanged looks, both of us tense and silent, hoping the next exit would be ours. The air in the car felt thick and heavy, and every second stretched out longer, like the ride was never going to end. I asked him to drop us off at the main entrance when I saw the mall parking lot ahead. The sign for Westfield was big and red, and I could see crowds of people going in and out, cars looping around for parking spots. He hesitated, kept his foot on the brake, not putting the car in park right away. "I could wait for you," he said, staring at Jessica through the rear view. "Save you girls another ride back, you know. Not safe with all the weirdos out here." I tried to sound casual, told him thanks, but we were going to see friends after shopping. Jessica nodded quickly. He looked at both of us in the mirror for a long second. "You sure? Not a big deal." I just said, "Yeah, we're good. Thanks," and started opening the back door. Jessica reached for the handle, but before she could get out, he leaned over, put his hand on her thigh, squeezing just above her knee. It was quick but forceful, not a joke or a mistake. Jessica jerked away, her face twisting, and shoved open the door so hard it bounced back. I scrambled out behind her, not looking back, just trying to move fast. The sun felt blinding for a second outside, my legs shaky as I walked onto the curb. Jessica was pale, holding onto her bag with both hands, eyes darting everywhere. We walked toward the entrance, trying to look normal in front of families and couples going in and out of the mall. I kept expecting to hear him yell something after us, but he didn't. I didn't look back until we were right up against the glass doors, pretending to check my phone. We ducked behind some concrete pillars near the entrance, the kind where people usually smoked or waited for rides. Jessica leaned her back to the wall, glancing over her shoulder. her breath shaky. I peeked around the edge and saw his car parked in the lot, maybe 50 yards away, just out of reach from most of the crowd. He hadn't left. He was sitting there, hands on the steering wheel, head turned toward us. Every few seconds, the sunlight would flash off his glasses as he shifted in his seat. We didn't move, didn't talk. Shoppers came and went, nobody noticing us except for a little girl who stared before her mom pulled her inside. We waited there for at least 20 minutes. My legs started to ache from standing still. Jessica kept asking if he was still there. I told her yes, every time. I wanted to go inside, but I couldn't make myself step out into the open. He was just waiting. I tried to convince myself we were overreacting, that maybe he was just getting ready to leave. A security guard noticed us after a while, walking slowly along the sidewalk, checking us out. He was a big guy. His name tag said David Cole. He stopped, asked if everything was all right, if we were waiting for someone. Jessica was about to say no, but I blurted out that we just had a really weird ride and pointed out the blue Ford sedan sitting in the lot. I could see the guard's face change, his eyes narrowing, looking over at the car. "You know that man?" he asked. Jessica shook her head and told him about what happened, how the guy tried to touch her, and how he was still watching us. Cole didn't ask more questions, just nodded and told us to wait there. He walked straight out into the parking lot, heading toward the sedan with slow, steady steps. The second the guard got close, the man started his engine. I could hear the car even from where we were standing. He backed up so fast the wheels squealed, then turned sharply and sped out of the parking lot, swinging past the stop sign without looking back. Cole watched him go, then came back to us and told us to follow him. He brought us inside the mall through the employee entrance and down a hallway that smelled like old popcorn and cleaning chemicals. He brought us to the mall office, a little room with a metal desk and a few chairs, and asked us to sit down. He picked up the phone and called someone, told them there'd been an incident outside. Then he let us call our parents, handed us his personal cell phone because the office one was for business use only. Jessica's hands shook as she dialed. I called my dad and told him where we were, what happened. Cole said he'd seen that car around before, usually with the same driver just sitting for hours at a time, not shopping, not meeting anyone. He said they'd filed a few notes about it, but now there was something real to report. Another security guard came in, took our names and a description of the car. They said they'd let the local police know, just in case. Cole walked us back out to the main lobby and waited with us until our parents arrived. Jessica's mom hugged her so hard she started crying right there in the lobby. My dad didn't say much, just took my bag and walked me out with his arm around my shoulders. After that, neither of us ever hitchhiked again. I think about that day whenever I see girls waiting by the road with their thumbs out, laughing, not worried about anything bad happening. I remember how small we felt, hiding behind those pillars, just hoping someone would notice something wasn't right. I'm glad the guard took us seriously and didn't just walk past. Jessica and I promised each other we'd never get into a stranger's car again, no matter how normal they looked. It's strange how something so small, just a drive to the mall, can turn into the thing you remember every time you're supposed to feel safe. So last summer, me and my wife Jessica went camping near Fort Garland, Colorado for a long weekend. We booked campsite 47, which was tucked way back in the pines, separated from the other sites by a small hill and a row of boulders. It wasn't a huge campground, but our spot was set off on its own enough that you couldn't really see the neighbors, just a little glow of their campfires down the slope at night. We liked it that way. I parked the truck up near the gravel pad, and we set up the travel trailer with the tongue pointing back towards the trees. The site had a picnic table, a rusty fire ring, and a wooden post for hanging trash to keep raccoons out. The first day went by normal. We woke up early and drove out to San Luis Lake for some fishing, brought back a couple of small trout, and cooked them up with potatoes for dinner. The air was thin and crisp up there, smelled like sap and old smoke, and it was dead quiet except for the wind in the pines. There were maybe 6 other campers in the whole loop, a couple families and 2 older RVs near the entrance. Most folks just nodded or waved. Nobody seemed the chatty type. After dinner, we sat by the fire a while and watched the light fade out behind the hill. We listened to a few podcasts off my phone, but the service was spotty. By 9, Jessica was yawning. She went inside, did her teeth, and crawled into bed. I cleaned up the site, locked the cooler in the truck, and sat out by the dying fire for another half hour or so with a book. Even with the lantern on the table, the woods felt dense and dark. I could hear little things rustling in the brush. Maybe chipmunks, nothing big. Finally, I doused the fire and went inside. The trailer felt warm and safe, just the hum of the little battery fan by the bed. Jessica was out cold, wrapped up with her head buried under the quilt. I set my book and phone on the table by the window, checked the lock on the door twice, and made sure the blinds were pulled down tight. Outside, everything looked still, just black trees and the little glint off the truck mirrors. The closest other site, 49, was about 100 yards away through thick brush. There weren't any big lights at the campground, just the occasional beam from a flashlight, but by now even those had died out. I lay on my back listening to Jessica breathe. She always slept deep in the woods, but I had a hard time winding down, so I read for a while with a little clip light, just flipping pages and listening to the wind nudge the trailer walls. Eventually, I started to drift, letting the low sounds outside blend together into background noise. I must have actually fallen asleep for a bit, because when I opened my eyes again, the book had slid onto my chest and my head felt heavy. It was quiet in the trailer, that deep hush where you can hear every little creak of the frame and the distant hiss of wind outside. I blinked and listened, trying to work out what had woken me. It was just past midnight by the cheap digital clock above the kitchen sink. I lay there, not moving, and then I heard it. A slow, steady crunching on the gravel just outside. Not quick, not animal-like. It was measured, like footsteps. The sound was close, definitely close enough that I could hear the loose stones shifting under someone's weight. At first, I tried to convince myself it was a raccoon, or maybe a deer nosing around the trash post, but the rhythm wasn't right. It was deliberate. One step, a pause, another step, the crunch of shoes on gravel. I felt the hairs on my arms stand up. The steps circled the trailer, slow and even, coming up past the front hitch, around by the big window on the side where Jessica was sleeping, then pausing again by the rear door. I shook Jessica's shoulder, not too hard, just enough to wake her. She blinked up at me, groggy. "What is it?" I whispered for her to be quiet. We both listened. The footsteps started up again, now closer to the main door. There was a long pause, then the faint sound of metal on metal. Someone tried the handle. It rattled but didn't turn. I'd locked it, like always, but my pulse still thudded in my chest. We both held our breath. Whoever it was moved around to the side door, past the cooler, and tried that handle too. Quieter this time, but just as firm. I sat up, grabbed my flashlight, and called out, "Who's there?" My voice sounded too loud in the small space. There was no answer. The footsteps stopped again, just outside the window by the table, maybe 6 feet from where I was sitting. Neither of us moved. We just waited, hearts pounding, staring at the locked door and the thin curtains between us and the night. The footsteps moved away, and for a few seconds we could hear branches snapping out in the brush behind the trailer. Jessica whispered she wanted to peek through the blinds, but I shook my head and mouthed, "Don't." I stayed sitting up, clutching the flashlight, just listening. It sounded like whoever was out there was circling through the undergrowth, heavy enough to break twigs underfoot, not bothering to hide the noise. The sound faded further into the trees, then stopped. The air inside felt stale. We didn't say anything, just sat together on the bed, both trying not to move, ears straining for anything that might come closer. Every little sound outside, the breeze, a chipmunk, branches moving, made me flinch. At one point the footsteps came back, slow and steady, but this time farther off. Jessica stayed curled up, barely breathing. An hour passed. The trailer creaked and settled. We kept the lights off and didn't look outside. My watch said it was nearly 2:30 when the sounds finally stopped. We waited another half hour before we even tried to lay back down. I never really fell asleep, just drifted in and out, listening for the smallest sound. When the sky finally started to lighten, I was already up. The woods looked gray and empty through the trailer windows. Jessica made coffee, and we forced down some cereal, neither of us saying much. When I finally opened the door, the first thing I saw were muddy streaks across the white siding just below the window. Dark smears, clear enough to see the shape of a hand. I walked around to the other side. More prints, all at about waist height, with long fingers pressed flat against the wall. Down by the rear storage compartment, the dirt was trampled. Boot prints, probably men's, pressed deep where the ground was soft. There were prints all the way around the trailer, in a rough circle, stopping at the steps by both doors. Even the padlock on the storage box had smears of mud on it. I called Jessica outside. She just stared at the marks, not saying anything. It was obvious someone had spent a while trying to find a way in. We packed up our stuff in silence and walked down to the campground office. The manager was an older guy, heavy-set, with a Denver Broncos cap pulled low on his head. He listened to what we said without looking surprised at all. "We've had some problems lately," he told us. Few other campers saw people walking around the sites at night, checking doors. He opened a small spiral notebook and flipped through a few pages. There was a list, dates, site numbers, short descriptions. "It's been a bad month," he said, tapping the page. "Mostly local types, looking for easy pickings. They don't care much who's inside." He pointed out that our site was way out of sight from anyone else, that the hill and trees made it hard for other campers to notice anything. "You want? I can move you up front," he offered. "Closer to the lights. We're watching things more closely now." Jessica glanced at me, and we both nodded. We didn't feel like taking another chance. We hauled everything back into the truck and left Site 47 behind. The drive up to the new spot was short, maybe a couple minutes through the campground loop. Site 12 was just off the main road, a little closer to the office and the bathrooms, and not as private. There were 2 other trailers parked just a few yards away, and the street light from the entrance cast a big circle of light over half the site. It didn't feel as wild or peaceful, but after what happened, we didn't care. We set up the trailer and put out our chairs, but neither of us felt like sitting outside. Jessica kept looking up every time someone walked by. I spent the afternoon cleaning the handprints off the trailer with a rag and a bucket of soapy water, scrubbing until all the marks were gone. That evening, there were security patrols driving slowly through the campground, their headlights sweeping the trees. I saw the manager stop and check a couple of sites, talking to campers as he passed. We kept our doors locked and the blinds down. The new site felt safer, but it was hard to relax. I kept thinking about how easily someone had walked right up to us in the middle of the night, how close they'd gotten. The next morning, Jessica said she wanted to cut the trip short. but we decided to stay just one more night before heading home. Nothing happened that last night, but neither of us slept much. After we got back, it stuck with us. We always used to look for the most secluded, quiet campsites. Now, we only pick spots with good visibility, close to the road and other people. We check the reviews, look at the satellite photos, make sure there are plenty of campers nearby. I think about those handprints sometimes, and how easy it would have been for someone to get inside if we hadn't been careful. Sometimes I catch myself listening at night, waiting for footsteps in the gravel. We haven't been back to Fort Garland since. When I was 32, I rented an isolated cabin in Montana to get ready for a hiking trip I was supposed to do with my coworkers. The plan was simple. I'd get 2 days there alone, so I could go over the route and get everything organized. Then 4 of them would drive up from Boise and meet me at the cabin for the rest of the week. I wanted a little time alone first, just to get away from the city and make sure I had the trail details down, because the area had some tricky passes, and I didn't want to lead everyone into trouble. The cabin was about 10 miles from the nearest town. It was one of those listings I found on a vacation rental website. The ad said it was secluded, quiet, and a good spot for anyone wanting privacy. There were a couple of pictures: a wooden porch with a view of the pines, a gravel driveway, a bare little kitchen with a gas stove and a worn-out sofa. When I got there, it felt even more remote than I expected. The drive-in was long, with nothing but tall pines on either side and barely a road, just a track of ruts and gravel that made me slow down every mile or two to keep my old car from bottoming out. The last bit of road led down a small hill to a clearing, and there was the cabin. There was nobody else around, no other cabins, no campers. It was quiet enough that I could hear the wind moving through the trees and the occasional caw of a crow. The air smelled of pitch and dry earth. I parked next to the porch and hauled my gear inside. Inside, the place was small. 1 bedroom, a little living room with a couch, a cheap plastic table, and a narrow kitchen. The bathroom was just a shower and a toilet with a little window that faced out into the woods. There was a landline mounted on the wall, and a small note next to it with the number for the property management company, some instructions about water and trash, and a reminder that there was no cell service anywhere nearby. There were a couple of basic supplies in the cupboards: a half bag of rice, instant coffee, some old cooking oil. Everything else, I brought myself. That first day went fine. I spread out my topo maps on the table, double-checked our planned route on my GPS, and started sorting out the food and gear. I kept the windows open for the air. Around noon, a couple of deer moved through the clearing, and I watched them graze for a while. There was nothing out of the ordinary, and for the most part, it was what I wanted. No one to bother me, just time to check my gear and think through the trip. I spent the afternoon labeling Ziploc bags, taping up gear, testing my water filter, and going over my checklist. I checked the locks on the doors and windows out of habit before turning in for the night. On the second morning, the weather was good, so I decided to hike out to the trailhead. It was about 2 miles away, down a gravel access road that cut through the forest, and then connected with the main hiking trail we were planning to use. I set out after breakfast, taking a light pack and a notebook to jot down any issues I saw on the way. The path was freshly cleared. Looked like the Forest Service had come through recently and cut back a lot of undergrowth. There was a little mud, but nothing too bad, and the markers were easy to follow. I reached the trailhead sooner than I thought. There was a wooden sign, a faded map in a plexiglass case, and an old trash barrel. The only car there was mine. I walked up and down the first half mile of the trail to check for blowdowns or anything washed out, then headed back. It was only about 1 when I turned around, so I took my time on the walk back. The woods felt quiet, almost heavy. I didn't see any animals this time, but there was a steady, dry wind that kept the branches swaying overhead. As I got closer to the cabin, I started thinking about dinner and maybe getting the fire pit going before dark. When I stepped out into the clearing by the cabin, I stopped. There was a pickup truck parked next to my car. It was a faded blue Ford, a little older than mine, with Montana plates and a lot of dust on the fenders. At first, I thought maybe one of the property managers had come by, but the note in the cabin had said they'd call ahead for anything like that, and I hadn't heard the phone ring. The truck was parked close, almost blocking my car in. The windows were rolled up, and the cab was empty. I walked around it slowly, looking for any sign of someone nearby, but there were no footprints or anything in the dirt besides my own. The bed of the truck had some old rope, a broken plastic cooler, and a pair of work gloves. The doors were locked. I went up to the porch and checked the cabin door. Still locked. Nothing inside looked touched. My gear was just where I left it, and the windows were shut. I walked around the place, looking for anyone, but the woods were silent. There was nobody out back or near the trees. Trying to stay calm, I went inside and picked up the landline to call the property management company. I explained about the truck and asked if anyone was supposed to be there. The woman on the phone said there were no maintenance people scheduled, no cleaners, and no inspections. She told me I was the only renter for the week and nobody should be on the property but me. I thanked her, hung up, and stood there, looking out the window at the truck sitting next to my car, engine cold, nothing moving in the forest. What bothered me was that there were no other buildings for miles in any direction. The only way in or out was the gravel drive I'd used, which snaked through the woods for at least a mile before meeting the main road. It didn't make sense for anyone to just end up here by accident, especially with a local plate. I walked a loop through the woods, circling the property, checking the tree line for any sign that someone had headed out on foot, but there was nothing. The dirt near the porch had only my shoe prints and the wide tracks from the truck's tires. No recent footprints led away from it, and nothing around the small fire pit or the broken-down shed in the back. The truck itself was tidy inside, empty fast food wrappers, a pair of worn boots, some oil-stained overalls slung over the passenger seat. A clipboard on the dash had a few receipts from a local hardware store, and a handwritten list that looked like supply runs, but nothing with a name. The keys weren't in the ignition. In the bed, under the gloves and tangled rope, I spotted a red gas can and a dented metal toolbox, the kind mechanics use. None of it explained what the owner was doing out here. I started to wonder if maybe someone had gotten lost or their vehicle broke down. But then why leave it locked, and why not come to the cabin to ask for help? The sun was dropping behind the trees, and the clearing got dim fast. I brought my gear inside, turned on every light, and double-checked the locks on both doors and the windows. I kept glancing out every few minutes, expecting to see someone walk up from the woods, but nothing moved. There were no sounds but the normal creaks of the building settling and the wind in the branches outside. As the hours went by, my nerves kept ramping up. There was no phone service for my cell, so I couldn't look up the plate or message anyone. I didn't see any headlights through the trees, no flashlights, nothing to suggest anyone was even close. By 8, I was pacing the length of the cabin, listening at the front and back doors for any sound. I kept telling myself maybe someone would show up and explain it, but part of me knew there was no good reason for this. Just after 9, I heard heavy footsteps on the wooden porch out front. They were slow, deliberate, loud enough that I felt them in the floor. I crept to the side window and looked through a gap in the curtain. There was a tall man standing just outside the door, still as a post, staring straight at the pickup. He was wearing work pants and a thick shirt, the sort of thing you'd use for chopping wood or building fences, and a dark cap pulled low over his face. He didn't move for a while, just stood there, facing away from the cabin like he was thinking or waiting for something. I tried to shift to a better angle, but the old floorboard creaked under my foot. Instantly, he turned and locked eyes with the window. I froze. He marched over to the door and started yanking at the handle hard, both hands shaking the frame, not saying a word. When it didn't budge, he moved to the windows, trying to peer inside, pressing his face to the glass, cupping his hands to see better. Every few seconds, he'd step back, look around, then try another window, checking all around the cabin in a slow, thorough circuit. I retreated to the bedroom, locked the door behind me, and picked up the landline. My hand was shaking as I dialed 911. I told the dispatcher my address, described the man, and explained he was trying to get inside. She told me to stay quiet, stay hidden, and that a deputy was already out on another call nearby. She said someone would be there as soon as possible, but it might take 30 or 40 minutes given the distance. I kept the line open, whispering updates as I heard the man circling the house, rattling door handles and scraping at the back windows. For several more minutes, he kept up the same routine, moving from window to window, pausing to check his truck, then coming back to the doors. At one point, I thought I heard him muttering, but it was too muffled to make out. He gave the front door one last hard tug, then walked off the porch. I heard gravel crunching outside, then the engine of the truck turned over. Headlights swept across the living room wall. I stayed down and listened as the truck backed up, then slowly drove away up the long driveway. I didn't move from the floor until all I could hear was wind again. About half an hour later, red and blue lights flickered through the trees. A deputy and two volunteer firefighters pulled up in a county SUV. They checked the property with flashlights, walking the perimeter with their hands on their holsters. I let them inside and told them everything. The deputy nodded like he'd heard this before. He said there had been break-ins and thefts at cabins all through the area in the past few months. Sometimes, he explained, it was someone looking for stuff to steal. Other times, people set up to cook meth or just squat for a few nights. Usually they came back if they saw a car, but no people, assuming the place was empty. He took down the details of the truck, make, model, color, and the plates. Said he'd put out a call to the county, but unless the guy showed up again or was caught with stolen stuff, there wasn't much to do tonight. He offered to sit with me until morning, but I told him I'd be leaving as soon as I packed up. After they left, I threw my gear into bags and loaded up the car. Every few minutes, I'd stop and look out the window, expecting headlights to appear on the driveway, but there was nothing. I kept the lights off and moved fast. By midnight, I was driving down the gravel track, windows rolled up, checking the rearview mirror at every bend. I didn't see the pickup again. I pulled into a motel in the next town and stayed there until the sun came up. The next morning, I called my coworkers and told them what happened. We changed our plans and booked a group campsite closer to town, someplace with other people around and a ranger station nearby. We never did go back to that cabin. Even after the trip was over and I got home, I kept thinking about the man, the way he'd move so slowly and methodically around the cabin, not saying a word, just staring in the windows. I don't know if he was looking for something in particular or just wanted a place to hide, but either way, I never wanted to find out. When I was 17, my friends Mark and Brandon and I used to explore abandoned buildings around our town in Michigan. It started because there wasn't much to do in the suburbs, especially when the cold months hit. By then, we'd already run out of the usual places to hang out. Mark got this idea from his older brother, who talked about the empty factories and old neighborhoods in Detroit's industrial district. All the buildings left behind when companies closed down in the 90s. People said you could just walk in, take pictures, even find old stuff left behind. I didn't really believe most of the stories, but it sounded better than sitting at home. So that November weekend, we decided to drive out there ourselves. Mark borrowed his mom's car and picked me up just after lunch. We got Brandon on the way. He brought a flashlight, a camera, and an old jacket that always smelled like smoke. The drive took about half an hour, long enough for us to wonder if we'd get in trouble if someone saw us poking around. We didn't talk much, just looked out the window at all the rundown shops, the graffiti, the busted fences, and the cold sky over everything. We ended up in the East District just as the sun was starting to go down. It was colder there, the wind sharper. Most of the houses were boarded up with plywood, some had windows busted out, and the streetlights barely worked. The whole place looked empty except for a couple of stray dogs and an old guy pushing a shopping cart full of cans. We parked the car under a half-dead tree near the curb, where a pile of tires was stacked next to a fire hydrant. The street was cracked and full of leaves and broken glass. Mark was the one who spotted the Apollo, an old movie theater from the 60s. The faded sign was still hanging over the door, all the letters gone except for P and O. The ticket booth was still there too, covered in grime, with a piece of plywood nailed over the window. It looked like it had been closed for decades. I remember the doors had layers of posters, old movie ads peeling off and turning black from rain. There were beer cans on the steps and a shopping cart tipped over in the weeds. Mark wanted to try the front door first, but it was locked tight and the glass was cracked. Brandon pointed out a side exit covered in stickers and paint. He noticed a window next to it with the glass broken out and jagged around the edges. He pulled his sleeve down and reached inside to unlock it. Mark kept looking around, but there wasn't a single car or person anywhere near us. Only a cold wind and the sound of leaves scraping on the sidewalk. We climbed through the broken window one by one. I went last, trying not to rip my jeans. Inside, it was nearly pitch dark. I could barely see the outlines of Mark and Brandon in front of me. There was a strong smell of mold, dust, and something rotten, like wet carpet left in a basement too long. The first thing I noticed was the lobby. The walls were painted a dull red, most of the paint peeling off in strips. There was a concession stand with a shattered glass case and old wrappers and cardboard boxes on the floor. The counter was sticky with spilled soda dried into brown patches. The carpet was worn down to the threads, stained dark with patches that looked like water damage. We stood there for a second, waiting for our eyes to adjust. Brandon flicked his flashlight on and swept the beam around. The light caught on a pile of broken chairs, popcorn buckets, and an old register. The place was silent except for our footsteps crunching on bits of glass and plaster. Mark made a joke about rats and kicked an empty can out of his way. I could see old movie posters on the wall, some torn almost in half. There was a payphone near the bathroom doors, receiver missing and wires sticking out like frayed hair. We walked past the ticket stand and into the main theater. The doors groaned when we pushed them open. Inside, the air felt heavier, full of dust. The room was big, with rows of old seats still bolted to the floor, all facing a blank, torn movie screen. Most of the seats had foam sticking out, the cloth faded and damp. The floor was covered with piles of construction debris, broken wood, chunks of plaster, empty paint cans. Someone had dragged a metal barrel in and left a pile of burnt trash inside. Mark shined his phone flashlight at the stage, which was littered with old tools, ropes, and a couple of beer bottles. It felt like nobody had set foot in here for years. Brandon started taking pictures with his camera, turning the flash on every few seconds. The light bounced off the dust in the air, making it look like the whole place was full of tiny white insects. Mark wandered down the aisle, pointing at the old projector room above us. He said he wondered if it was still full of reels. I stayed near the back, keeping my eyes on the doors. There was something about the dark corners that made me nervous, like someone could step out any second. Then Mark stopped and held up his hand for us to be quiet. He whispered, "Did you guys hear that?" Brandon and I shook our heads. Mark said he heard footsteps upstairs, like someone moving around above the lobby. We all stopped moving and listened, but all I could hear was the wind rattling the boards outside and maybe a rat scurrying in the wall. Brandon said it was probably just the old building settling or something falling over. I agreed, but Mark didn't look convinced. He kept glancing at the balcony doors. He said, "I'm serious, man. There's someone up there." His voice was low and tense, not joking like before. Brandon tried to brush him off, saying the place was empty, but Mark was already walking toward the stairs by the lobby. He said if we wanted to prove him wrong, we should go up and check it out. Brandon rolled his eyes, but he followed. I didn't want to look like a coward, so I went too. The stairs creaked under our feet, making a noise that echoed up the empty hall. The handrail was loose, the paint flaking off and leaving chips on our hands. At the top, we could see the balcony, still lined with old seats, some of them broken and covered in thick dust. Mark pointed the flashlight down the rows. Nothing but empty chairs and piles of plaster. But we kept moving, just to be sure, the beam of light shaking as Mark's hand trembled slightly. Brandon muttered about raccoons and kept taking pictures, the flash lighting up the shadows for half a second at a time. I kept glancing back at the dark hallway behind us, but nothing moved. The air felt even colder up there, like it came straight through the broken roof. Mark stopped at the far end of the balcony, pointing the light toward the projection booth door. The handle was broken, hanging off to the side, and the wood around the lock was splintered. He listened again, his head tilted like he was trying to catch any sound. That's when we heard a thud from somewhere deeper in the balcony. It was quiet, but not part of the building settling. It sounded like a footstep, heavy and slow, coming from behind the old curtains. We all froze, listening. At the far end of the balcony, we hesitated. The flashlight beam bounced off the walls, catching bits of insulation and old candy wrappers. Then, behind the last row of seats near the fire exit, something shifted. Mark moved closer, squinting into the shadows, and then stopped so fast that Brandon nearly walked into him. I edged over to see what he was staring at. There was a man sitting on the floor with his knees drawn up, head down, hands clenched around something in his lap. He looked up slowly when Mark's light swept over him, and that's when we saw he was holding a folding knife, half open, his knuckles white. He was middle-aged, face rough with stubble, hair sticking out from a dirty knit hat. His jacket was torn, greasy at the collar, and he had dirt under his fingernails. The man didn't say a word, just stared at us with flat, tired eyes. We didn't move or speak at first. The knife was only a few feet away and he was between us and the nearest stairwell. For a second, nobody breathed. Brandon mumbled something like, "Sorry, man, we're just leaving." But the guy didn't react. He gripped the knife tight, his thumb moving back and forth along the handle. Mark lifted both hands to show he didn't mean anything, and I did the same. "We're leaving, okay?" Mark said, voice quiet and even. The man still didn't answer. I looked at his boots and saw one was untied, the lace trailing through a puddle on the floor. He looked exhausted, but under that, he was angry or scared to see us there. For a long moment, we just stood like that, not sure what would happen if we moved too fast. Then the man's grip loosened a little. He dropped his head, not looking at us anymore. I took a careful step back, and Mark did too. Brandon swallowed hard, his hand shaking as he put his camera away. As soon as we were past the end of the row, the guy turned away, shoulders hunched like he was bracing for something. We moved quickly, not running, just walking as steady as we could, all three of us keeping him in the corner of our eyes. The second we were out of his sight, Mark whispered, "Go now." And we bolted down the stairs, boots banging against the steps, hands sliding on the dusty rail. At the bottom, we didn't even look back. We sprinted down the aisle, through the doors, into the lobby, then out through the window we'd come in. I scraped my knee on the glass but barely felt it. The cold air outside hit us like a slap. Brandon dropped the flashlight and left it behind. Mark fumbled the keys as we reached the car, but finally got the door open. We piled in, slammed the doors, and he started the engine with shaking hands. Nobody said anything as we pulled away from the curb. I kept my eyes on the theater until it disappeared behind us, waiting to see if the man followed. But there was nothing but empty street and boarded houses. The whole drive home, the car was quiet. Mark kept his eyes straight ahead, knuckles white on the steering wheel. Brandon stared out the window. I sat in the back, rubbing my knee, still feeling the press of the man's stare in the dark. Nobody talked about what happened. We got off the freeway and headed through our neighborhood, the trees bare and dark. Mark dropped us off without a word, and I walked inside, straight to my room, locking the door for the first time in years. The next few days were normal on the surface. I went to school, did my homework, tried to forget about it. Part of me thought the man must have just been a squatter, probably used to people stumbling into those places. Maybe we'd just startled him. Still, every time I looked at the window at night, I checked the shadows on the street. Then, 2 days after, my mom called me into the kitchen. She was standing at the sink, arms crossed. "Did you have someone looking for you?" she asked. I frowned, told her no. She said a man had come by earlier, asked Mrs. Peterson next door if I was home yet. He didn't give his name, just wanted to know which house was ours. Mrs. Peterson said she didn't know me and told him to try the police if he needed to find someone. My mom said he just left after that, didn't say another word. My stomach dropped. I asked her what he looked like, but she didn't see him herself. Just what Mrs. Peterson said. A man in a dark jacket, kind of dirty, middle-aged, walking slow like he didn't care if anyone saw him. I didn't tell her anything at first. I just went to my room, shut the door, and tried to calm down. The only way he could have found our street was by following us after we left the theater, or by getting the license plate and looking it up somehow. It was too much of a coincidence. That night, I barely slept. I kept hearing creaks in the house and footsteps on the sidewalk. I checked the locks twice before I finally lay down. My phone buzzed with a message from Brandon. Just, "Did you tell anyone?" I didn't answer. I felt like if I talked about it, it would make it more real. The next day, I told my parents the truth. I explained about the theater, the man with the knife, how we'd run, and how I thought he might have followed us or gotten our license plate. My dad was quiet, didn't say much. My mom was scared, angry, asking why I'd gone there in the first place. They called the police to file a report, but the officer just listened, nodded, and said unless the man threatened us directly or tried to break in, there wasn't much they could do. He took notes, gave us his card, and told us to call if we saw the man again. After that, my dad installed a security camera by the front door and made sure all the windows locked tight. We kept the porch light on at night. I stopped hanging out after dark. If a car slowed down on our street, I always checked who was inside. For weeks, I waited to see that man's face at the end of the driveway or standing under a street lamp. But nothing happened. The man didn't come back. Maybe he figured it wasn't worth the trouble, or maybe Mrs. Peterson scared him off. Still, I wondered every time I passed her house if she'd saved me from something worse, I didn't go urban exploring again after that. Mark and Brandon tried to get me to check out some other place that winter, but I always had an excuse. We never really talked about what happened in Detroit. I still see the old Apollo whenever I drive through the city, the sign hanging crooked and the windows black. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if that neighbor had told the man which house was mine, if he'd knocked on the door instead of leaving. It's not something I like to think about for very long. When I started working nights as a security guard at the auto parts factory in Detroit, I figured it would be just another job to pay the bills. I was 34 then, living in a basement apartment on the east side, and I didn't have much going on. The factory was in the industrial district. Long rows of corrugated steel buildings, chain link fences topped with barbed wire, lots of broken glass in the gutters. Every night, I drove over right before 10, parked by the side entrance, and clocked in for my shift. Most nights, it was boring. I'd do the first round, walk the length of the fence, check the padlocks, shine my light under the dumpsters in case anyone was sleeping rough. Sometimes there were raccoons. Sometimes just the wind moving trash along the curb. That night, everything started normal. It was cold, air sharp enough that it made my nose run. The factory always smelled faintly like oil and rust, a mix that settled into my clothes. I grabbed my flashlight, checked my radio, and started my first round. I always walked the same route, down past the main entrance, along the shipping bays, through the empty break room, then around the back to the loading dock. The place was quiet, only the distant hum of traffic on Jefferson and the faint clatter of the heating system running in one of the side offices. Half the factory was empty now, just unused machines sitting in the dark. The only real light came from the security office and the flood lamps over the parking lot. I was halfway through my walk when I heard it. A clang of metal, sharp, echoing from the loading dock area. At first I stopped, just listening. Could have been the wind, I thought. There were always loose pieces of sheet metal lying around back there, and the wind sometimes caught them and made a racket. But a minute later, I heard it again. This time it was a double clang, like something being hit on purpose. I stood still and waited, hoping to hear footsteps or voices, but nothing came except the sound again, a steady, rhythmic pounding. That's when I realized it wasn't random like the wind. It sounded like someone was working at something, hitting metal with metal in a regular pattern. I walked quicker, trying not to let my boots crunch too loud on the gravel. The shadows felt different that night, thicker somehow. The lights over the dock flickered as I approached. I kept my flashlight pointed low, careful not to make myself a target if someone was hiding out. As I got closer, I listened for anything else, talking, a car engine, maybe laughter. But it was just the metal clang and the steady whine of the wind through the fence. My heart was beating a little faster than usual, but I tried to stay calm. 9 times out of 10, it was nothing. I'd seen kids break in before to mess around, leave beer bottles or tag the side walls. But this didn't feel like that. There was a purpose in the sound, like someone working in the dark with a plan. I walked up the concrete steps to the loading dock, shining my light over the doors. There were scuff marks on the ground, piles of scrap stacked along the wall, the old green dumpsters pushed up against the chain link fence. I listened hard, waiting for the sound to come again, but it stopped as soon as I got close. I waited there a long minute, not moving, just letting my eyes adjust. I didn't see anyone, but I felt watched, like whoever had made the noise was hiding nearby, waiting to see what I'd do. The feeling crawled up my back, real slow. I took a breath and stepped closer to the big rolling gate. That's when I noticed the lock hanging open at a strange angle. The steel loop was bent, and the side of the latch had been scraped raw. I got down and looked at it under my flashlight. The damage was fresh, bright silver metal showing through the chipped paint. Someone had hit it hard, maybe with a crowbar, trying to force it open. There were metal shavings scattered across the asphalt and a chunk of broken lock lying by the wheel of a parked trailer. I scanned the ground for footprints. There were scuff marks, but it was hard to tell in the half-light what was new and what was old. The air felt colder suddenly, like the wind had picked up, but there were no leaves moving, nothing but the steady humming from inside the building. I grabbed my radio and called in. Our dispatcher, Rita, worked nights from her place across town. I kept my voice steady, told her I'd found a forced lock and possible break-in at the dock, that I was going to do a full perimeter check. She said she'd notify the police and told me to keep her updated. I clipped the radio back to my belt and pulled out my notebook. I always logged everything, even the small stuff, but this didn't feel small. I walked the length of the dock, shining my light along the fence, checking the other gates and doors. The ground was littered with bottle caps, scraps of wire, the usual trash. I checked behind the dumpsters, under the trailer. Nothing but empty shadows and a crushed soda can. I headed back inside and went straight for the security office. The place was cramped, just a desk, an old chair, and a wall of black and white monitors. I flipped through the feeds, eyes moving quick from camera to camera. The lot out front was empty except for my old Chevy. The hallways were still and dark. I checked the feeds covering the dock area, watching for any sign of movement. That's when I saw him. A shape moving between the delivery trucks parked at the far edge of the lot. He was tall, dressed in dark clothes, and moved low, almost crouched, from the shadows of one truck to the next. He stopped and peeked around the edge of a trailer, staying just outside the circle of light thrown by the lamppost. I watched him for a minute, barely breathing. He looked up at the office windows, then ducked back down and crawled behind the rear wheels of a semi. I didn't recognize him. No jacket, no uniform, just a hood pulled tight over his head. He kept moving, slow and careful, checking over his shoulder every few seconds. He stayed close to the ground, slipping from one blind spot to the next. Every now and then he'd freeze, look around, then move again, never standing up straight, always close to cover. I watched him for several minutes, tracking him as he weaved his way between vehicles, keeping out of sight. He looked like he was waiting for something, maybe for me to leave the dock so he could finish whatever he started. I kept my eyes on the screen, waiting to see what he would do next. As soon as the guy realized he'd been seen on camera, I could tell by the way he moved. He froze for a split second between the trucks, then bolted low toward the edge of the lot. My heart was hammering as I watched him on the grainy feed, disappearing behind the stack of old crates near the fence. A second later, I caught a glimpse of his hand tugging at the chain link. He'd already cut a wide hole through the metal with wire cutters, just big enough for someone to squeeze through. I stayed where I was in the office, hands gripping the edge of the desk. Company policy was drilled into us. Do not pursue, do not confront, just observe and report. Even so, I wanted to rush out, see where he'd gone, but I forced myself to stay in place. The city cops and the patrol unit would be there soon. Rita said they were only a few minutes out. On the monitors, the guy pushed his way through the fence, dragging his bag and tools after him. He didn't even look back at the building. I wrote down everything I could remember about his appearance, the way he moved, the exact time he left. When the patrol officers arrived, their cars flashing blue and red across the walls, I let them in and led them out to the dock. We found the tools he'd left behind. A heavy-duty crowbar, some wire cutters, a half-open backpack full of work gloves, and a flashlight wrapped with electrical tape. There was mud on the bag, a broken zipper, and inside, nothing but an old sandwich and a few feet of copper wire. He must have dropped the rest when he crawled out. The fence sagged where he'd cut it, the links sharp and twisted. One officer bagged everything up and took my statement while his partner checked the rest of the perimeter. It turned out later that the guy was a known thief. The detective said he specialized in breaking into industrial sites, targeting places like ours for copper wiring and aluminum parts. He'd hit 3 other factories in the area over the last month, always at night, always slipping away before anyone could catch him. They showed me a blurry mugshot and asked if I could ID him, but I'd only seen his outline, nothing clear. They collected the tools, took prints, and said they'd keep me posted if anything came up. I went home after my shift, tired and cold, still replaying the footage in my head, wondering if I'd missed something. A few days later, the warehouse manager called me into his office. He said the final inventory showed we'd lost about $3,000 worth of copper wire and aluminum components. He pointed out the gaps in the storage racks, the stripped cables along the far wall, and the empty spools stacked up by the back door. They were upset, but not at me. In fact, management praised me for sticking to protocol, keeping myself safe, and alerting the police before more could be taken. They decided to overhaul the security system, installing 2 new cameras over the loading dock and adding motion sensors along the inside of the fence. They even started a sign-in sheet for all after-hours staff and hired another guard to cover weekend shifts. For a while, it felt like everyone was on edge, but by the end of the week, things went back to normal. I figured that was the end of it. About 2 weeks after the break-in, the phone started ringing at my apartment late at night. The first call came around midnight. I answered groggy, expecting maybe a wrong number. But the guy on the other end didn't say who he was. He just breathed into the receiver for a few seconds, then hung up. The next night, the phone rang again. This time, a man spoke. His voice was low, almost like a whisper, but rough. He said, "You cost me a lot of money, you know that?" Then he hung up again before I could say anything. After that, it became a pattern. Calls in the middle of the night, always from a blocked number. Sometimes he'd say things like, "You should mind your own business," or, "You think you're a hero, but you're not." The words weren't loud or angry, just flat and certain, like a fact. One night, the calls got more specific. The man said my name, my wife's name. He mentioned the street we lived on, the make and model of my car, and even described the backpack my son used for school. He told me to quit my job, to keep my mouth shut, or else. The police came and took a report, but the calls always came from different payphones across the city. They said it was hard to trace, and that whoever was making them knew how to cover their tracks. My wife was scared. We started locking every window and double-checking the doors before bed. I barely slept. Every time I walked to my car in the morning, I looked over my shoulder, half expecting someone to be watching from the shadows. It wasn't just one guy, the detective said. The thief must have been working with others, part of a crew that hit places all over the district. Factories, warehouses, construction sites. They'd get in, strip anything with copper or aluminum, and disappear before anyone noticed. I realized then that by following protocol and calling in the cops, I'd gotten the attention of people who didn't want to be noticed. They didn't want to hurt me, not really. Not if I stayed quiet and moved on. But if I made it hard for them to work, they'd find ways to scare me. After the 3rd week of threats, we changed our phone number, and I requested a transfer to the day shift. My boss agreed without question. Even now, years later, I still check over my shoulder when I'm walking through a dark parking lot. I never heard from the guy again, but sometimes when the phone rings late, I get that old, cold feeling in my stomach. Doing the right thing doesn't always end when you think it does. Sometimes, it just changes the way you live. When I was 8 years old, my mom Linda left me home alone one afternoon while she went out to the store for groceries. I was sitting on the living room floor, legs crossed, just watching cartoons and eating cereal from a big plastic bowl. The sun was coming in through the windows, making everything in the house look washed out and too bright. But I didn't mind it. I was used to these quiet afternoons. My mom worked a lot, and I knew her rules by heart. Don't answer the phone if you don't recognize the number, don't touch the stove, and never open the door for anyone. She always said, look through the peephole first. If you don't know them, don't even speak. That day felt like any other. I had the remote on my right and a little pile of action figures next to me. Every now and then I'd look at the clock to see how much longer I had before she'd be back. It was quiet, except for the TV. I remember the sound of the old fridge humming in the background and the way the wood floors creaked if you moved too fast. I didn't notice the time slipping by until I heard the doorbell. It wasn't just one ring. The bell went off once, then again, then again. Quick, like someone was really impatient or nervous. I muted the TV and just listened. Nobody ever rang our bell like that. Most people in our neighborhood just knocked, or my mom would call out to me if she'd forgotten her key. This was different. It made me freeze for a second. I stood up, still holding my cereal bowl, and walked slowly to the front door. My heart was going a little faster than before, but I remembered what my mom said. The peephole was at my eye level, and when I looked out, I saw a man standing right on our porch. He looked like he was maybe in his 40s, with dark hair that was thinning on top and a short beard. He wore a blue business suit, the kind you'd see at an office, and had a black briefcase in one hand and a notepad in the other. He was smiling, showing his teeth, and waving at the door, waving at me, as if he thought I should recognize him. But I didn't. I had never seen him before in my life. He didn't look like a delivery guy, and he wasn't in a uniform. His shoes were polished, and he stood in a way that made it seem like he belonged there, like this was just another stop in his day. I watched as he wiped sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand, and then pressed the doorbell again, still smiling. The sound echoed through the hallway. He looked straight at the door, sometimes glancing down the street, but mostly just standing there and waiting. He started to knock, not too hard, but steady. I didn't move. I was close enough to the door that I could hear him breathing outside. My cereal felt heavy in my hand, and I set the bowl down on the little table by the entrance so it wouldn't spill. The man leaned in closer, squinting, as if he was trying to see through the peephole from the other side. It made me step back automatically, just a little. There was something too eager about the way he stood. He waved at the door again, then looked down at his notepad, flipped a few pages, and pressed the doorbell 2 more times. His smile never dropped. I stayed there, barely breathing, watching him. After a minute, he stopped ringing the bell and instead knocked a little louder, looking up and down the porch. He must have realized someone was home because he called out, "Hello? Anybody in there?" His voice was friendly, but the words felt rehearsed, too cheerful for someone who didn't know us. I stepped back further into the hallway, but I didn't leave the door. After maybe another 30 seconds, the man stepped back from the door and looked up at the house, checking the windows. He raised his hand and shaded his eyes, as if he was trying to see if anyone was watching from inside. Then he checked his watch, jotted something down on his notepad, and looked right back at the door. I could hear him tapping his foot on the porch. It was like he was waiting for a response, and the longer he stood there, the more uneasy I felt. The whole house felt different, the kind of stillness that only happens when you know someone's right outside. He knocked again, harder this time. Then he called out, "Excuse me, I'm here on an appointment. He waited, then cleared his throat and spoke again. It's important. I have paperwork. He held the notepad up to the peephole, like I was supposed to read something from it, but the writing was too small, and the glare from the sun made it impossible to see. I could just make out a few lines, but nothing clear. I thought about calling my mom, but I didn't want to leave the door. I waited, staring through the peephole, as the man shifted from foot to foot. He was sweating more now, wiping his face with a handkerchief, but he still smiled every time he looked up at the door. He glanced at his briefcase, and then at the street. Cars passed by, but no one stopped. The whole thing felt off. He looked too comfortable being there, too patient for someone who'd made a mistake. I finally spoke up, just like my mom had taught me. I made my voice loud, hoping it would sound like there was an adult in the house. "Who is it? What do you want?" I called out, not getting any closer to the door. The man's smile got wider. He spoke clearly, not shouting, but with a kind of fake calm that I didn't trust. "Good afternoon. I'm with Oak Realty, your local real estate agency. I'm here to evaluate your house for a scheduled sale appointment. Your mother filled out an online application last week. I just need to come inside for a few minutes. Take a few photos. Nothing more." I shook my head, even though he couldn't see me. "My mom didn't schedule anything," I said, keeping my hand on the lock. "You have the wrong house." The man raised the notepad again and tapped it, showing me a page full of writing. No, this is the right address. I have all the official paperwork. Just a few minutes, that's all I need." "Everything's in order. I promise I won't take long." He tried to sound reassuring, but there was something tense in the way he kept glancing around, still wiping sweat from his forehead. I said it again, louder this time. "My parents aren't home. You can't come in." He paused, lowered the notepad, and stared at the door. The smile was still on his face, but it looked more forced now. He looked down at his briefcase, opened it a crack, and shuffled through some papers. "I really do need to get inside," he said, a little sharper now. "Your mother set the appointment for exactly this time. Can you just open the door so we can get started? I'm on a tight schedule." He was standing closer to the door again, leaning in, his voice a little too loud for the quiet street outside. He tried the door handle gently, testing it, but the lock held. I took another step back, not answering, just watching. He stood there, waiting for me to say something, his hand still resting on the handle, not moving away. He stood outside the door a few seconds longer, still holding the handle. Then he leaned down and spoke again through the wood. His voice was lower this time. "I can see your green shutters from the street. Nice touch with the red flower pots. You have tomatoes in your backyard garden, right? I'm sure your mom would want this handled today." My throat felt tight. He was saying things he could have seen if he walked around the block, but it sounded like he already knew them before he even got to the door. He kept talking, naming little details about the house and yard that anyone in the neighborhood could maybe notice, but it felt like he was listing them to prove something. He paused, waiting for me to answer. I stayed quiet, just a few feet back, one hand on the wall behind me. "Look, I have a schedule to keep. If I can't do the evaluation now, maybe you can tell me when your parents will be home. It would only take a few minutes. Can you just tell me when your mom or dad gets back? I can wait outside if you want." He was trying to sound calm, but there was something behind his words, like he was running out of patience. I could hear the smile drop out of his voice for a second. My hands were shaking, but I kept my voice steady. "If you don't leave, I'm calling the police right now," I said. I didn't yell, but I wanted him to know I meant it. I didn't hear any more from him after that. The man stood there just a second longer, then let go of the handle and stepped back from the porch. I watched through the peephole as he walked quickly down the steps, looking over his shoulder, then turned and hurried down the sidewalk without looking back. He didn't go to any other house on the block. He kept his head low, briefcase clutched tight, and crossed the street. He got into a silver car parked down the block, on the corner where the big oak tree is, and drove off without turning on his headlights for the first half of the street. I stood at the door, not moving, until I was sure he was really gone. My mom came home maybe 20 minutes later. I met her at the door, still feeling shaky. She saw my face and asked what happened. I told her everything about the man at the door, how he knew about the shutters in the garden, how he said he was a real estate agent but kept asking when my parents would be home. I told her about the car and how he left when I said I'd call the police. She put the groceries on the floor and hugged me tight, then picked up her phone and started calling our neighbors. She was calm, but her voice was tight, every word clipped. She told Mrs. Johnson next door, then called Mrs. Lee across the street and the Hernandez family 2 houses down. The story spread fast. Mrs. Johnson said a man fitting that description had come to her door a few days before. He said he was from a different company, but also carried a briefcase and a notepad. He wanted to know if she lived alone or if her son was usually home in the afternoons. She thought it was strange, but didn't think much of it at the time. Mrs. Lee said the same man asked her if the family next door was home during the day and which houses had little kids. He kept asking about who lived where, what cars belonged to which family, and when people usually got back from work. As my mom talked to the neighbors, a few more people joined in. The Hernandez family said he'd come by their place too, asking what days the parents worked late and if their teen daughter was ever home by herself. Suddenly everyone was nervous, trying to remember every detail they could. My mom grabbed her phone again and called the police non-emergency number to report what happened. She wrote down the man's description, the car, and everything he'd said. Later that evening, a police officer in a dark blue uniform came to our house. He asked my mom to tell the whole story, then talked to me and listened without interrupting. He explained that sometimes burglars or worse pretend to be real estate agents or city workers so they can get information from kids or elderly people. He said they look up details from public records or just walk around and memorize what they see. It's not always about breaking in right away, the officer said, writing in his little notebook. Sometimes they're looking for easy targets, families with predictable schedules, houses that look empty during certain times. They collect information for days before they act. He asked if anyone had seen the man's license plate, but nobody had. The officer told my mom they'd patrol the area and let the other neighbors know to watch for anything strange. He said we'd done the right thing by not opening the door and refusing to give out information. My mom thanked him, and after he left, she sat down with me at the kitchen table. She was still calm, but her hands were shaking just a little as she looked over at me. The next day, my mom installed a security camera by our front door. She showed me how to use the video app on her phone and made sure all the windows and locks were working. She talked to me again about not giving out any information to strangers, even if they knew things about our house or acted like they belonged. She said, "If anyone ever tries to make you doubt what I've told you, you call me or call for help. Don't let anyone make you second guess it." The man never came back after the police report. Over the next few weeks, the neighborhood was quieter than usual. People kept their doors locked, and I'd see more neighbors talking in their driveways, watching the street. I never saw the man in the suit or the silver car again. But even now, years later, I remember how real it felt when he was outside our door, how convincing he sounded, and how close I came to opening the door just because he seemed to know so much. After that day, I always listened to my mom's rules, no matter what.